Bow tie, stand by to live.
London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and scrutinise his policies. This is Mayor's Question Time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. May I remind members that they may choose to wear a mask in the chamber unless speaking. Members are also reminded that any electronic devices should now be placed in front of the microphones. In case of emergency and need to exit the building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow security staff, and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Can I please ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for the absence this morning?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies received from Assembly members Berry and Assembly member Desai, and we have 2 Assembly members participating remotely, which is Assembly member Cooper and Assembly member Fortune.
Assembly member Duvella, you wanted...
Not on apologies, Chair, but I want to understand in orders 2-3, following the Chair's announcements. Can I confirm, Chair, whether you've received any update in the outcome of the police investigation into the party at CCHQ on December 2020, attended by Assembly member Bailey, and a potential breach of the COVID legislation? In the interest of Londoners, many of whom made big sacrifices during the pandemic, can the Chair confirm if he has received any representations or explanation from Assembly member Bailey since it was announced in December 21 that the Metropolitan Police were investigating, and following the recent announcement that the additional 50 fines have been issued relating to Partygate issues in Downing Street? As Chair, I understand that Assembly member Bailey has apologised to his mother. But can we expect him now to do the decent thing and apologise to Londoners and indeed colleagues on the London Assembly for his behaviour?
Assembly member Duval, I have received no information whatsoever regarding this, but I will ask the Secretary to look into this. As to making apologies, I think it's a matter of judgment for each Assembly member, and I will say no further on that issue this morning.
Thank you, Chair.
I begin with an update of the recent Assembly activity. Since we last met at the Mayor's Question Time meeting in March, we entered the pre-election period and local elections were held in London. Prior to that period, the Budget and Performance Committee met to discuss late changes to the Mayor's final budget. The Economy Committee wrote to both the Mayor and the Business Secretary about the gig economy, and the Housing Committee published a letter to the Mayor on the non-construction methods for expanding social housing in London. Since the local elections, the Transport Committee has written to the Mayor with recommendations on the progress of the Vision Zero plan. We also held our annual meeting where we thanked the outgoing Chair of the Assembly, Andrew Boff, for his chairmanship over the past year, and I was humbled to be appointed Chair for this for the next year. We also congratulate new chairs of the Assembly committees. I congratulate all of you and look forward to working to hard year of work with you and making sure that we improve the life of Londoners. So thank you. And can I ask the Assembly to note the interest set out at the item number 2? Do Assembly members have any other disposable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including any declarations of gifts and hospitality which are not reflected on the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? I take silence as being no. Okay, can I ask the Assembly to approve the minutes of the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held on the 24th of March to be signed by me as correct record? Okay, thank you. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 11th of March to 5th of May 2022? The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in the length on matters occurring since the publication of that report. Mr Mayor, over to you.
Good morning. Can I congratulate you on being appointed the new Chair of the Assembly? Can I thank Andrew Boff for his chairmanship over the last year? Can also actually congratulate all those members of the Assembly from all sides who were elected or re-elected at the recent council elections. I wish you the best of luck in representing your wards in your councils over the next 4 years. Today I'm pleased to announce an £18 million programme to support Londoners into work. The funding will be invested in skills boot camps, which are short, flexible courses to help fast-track Londoners into good jobs. We're focusing on ensuring Londoners have the skills they need to succeed in key sectors such as the green economy, digital and construction, which will aid our recovery and long-term economic success. I'm proud that our skills programmes are helping to give unemployed adults or those in low-paid work an opportunity to learn or retrain for free so they can get on to good future-proof jobs. Chair, since last Mayor's question time, I've been focusing on the issues that matters most to Londoners. We're continuing to bear down on violent crime by being both tough on crime and tough on the complex causes of crime. We still have a long way to go, but our approach is delivering results. The latest figures show that since May 2016, knife crime with injury is down by 11%, knife crime with injury in under 25-year-olds is down by 24%, gun crime is down by 30%, and burglary is down by 22%. We're also continuing to focus on building the new homes Londoners can afford, with the latest figures showing that 18,722 affordable homes were started last year. This is the highest number of starts since GLA records began in 2003. I'm pleased that once again we're exceeding our annual targets, but we're far from complacent because we still have a mountain to climb to fix the housing crisis in our city. Chair, yesterday it was revealed that inflation has hit a 40-year high. The cost of living crisis is hitting Londoners hard. That's why City Hall is providing support through our cost of living hub, and while continuing to put pressure on the government to not only provide additional support for those struggling with rising costs, but to give us the powers in London to freeze rents. As our city continues to recover from the pandemic, I'm also doing everything I can to support London's businesses and to boost our economy. As part of this, I recently visited the United States, where I banged the drum for London to bring the tourism, business and investment we need to our city. There's no doubt we face some challenging times ahead in London, but with the progress we're already making, I'm optimistic that we can continue to build a better London for everyone, a city that's fairer, safer and greener for all Londoners. Chair, I've been asked for 2 oral updates which I'll provide to the Assembly now with your permission. The first one's from Member Caroline Pidgeon on hostile vehicle mitigation. Temporary protective security barriers were installed across 8 of London's bridges in 2017 after the horrific terrorist attacks in London and Manchester. TfL is the asset owner or highway authority for 6 of those bridges. TfL is in the final stages of delivering permanent hostile vehicle mitigation measures on Westminster Bridge, overcoming significant engineering challenges to do so while also creating protected walking and cycling space in keeping with the heritage of the bridge. TfL's finances have been severely impacted by the pandemic and in the absence of long-term funding certainty from the government. It's had to pause work on some investment projects, including replacing temporary hostile vehicle mitigation measures with permanent solutions at Lambeth, Vauxhall, Blackfriars, London and Tower Bridges. In these locations, temporary hostile vehicle mitigation will be retained to continue to protect the public until funding can be allocated to restart the permanent programme. Once again, this demonstrates the urgent need for the government to provide a long-term funding deal for TfL. Chair, I've also been asked for a second oral update from Slim Member Emma Best on the London's Drugs Commission. Last week I was pleased to announce that the Chair of the London Drugs Commission is former Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary Lord Charlie Faulkner QC. With the appointment of the Chair, I'm now in the process of establishing the full Commission, which will include independent experts and leading figures from the fields of criminal justice, public health, politics, community relations and academia, to examine the effectiveness of our drugs laws with a particular focus on cannabis. The Commission will gather evidence from around the world on the approach taken to cannabis, the best methods of preventing related crime, the most effective criminal justice responses and the public health benefits of different approaches. The Commission will not consider Class A drugs. University College London have been appointed to inform the Commission's work through the assessment of existing evidence and provision of research on the criminal justice, health and economic implications of any potential change in policy. Following its work, the Commission will make policy recommendations for City Hall, the Government, the Police, the criminal justice system and public health services.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Do any members have questions on the oral update? Okay, in that case, we'll move on to the questions as on the Mayor's question paper. The first, we now move to the question on the priority paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask their questions that's proportionate to their size. The first question is 1716 on neurodiversity in London, in the name of Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you, Chair. Ensuring that London is an accessible and inclusive city in line with the social model of disability is very important to me as Mayor. Neurodiverse people have many strengths that should be recognised and celebrated. However, I know there are many individuals across London who are excluded and disabled by inaccessible employment, transport and education systems. Overcoming these barriers requires action across a range of different areas. Transport for London has specific objectives to improve the accessibility and inclusivity of London's transport network. As part of this, it is rolling out disability equality training to staff with specific modules on supporting neurodiverse customers and developing the first set of guidance on standards for the design of the built environment that considers the needs of neurodiverse people. I've supported schools to have a greater understanding of neurodiversity through my Inclusive Education Toolkit. Through the adult education budget, I've made provision for teachers and staff to be upskilled to better support neurodiverse learners. Employers can also help close the disability employment gap by making the world of work more accessible for neurodiverse Londoners. My Good Work Standard requires employers to look at reasonable adjustment policies that consider the needs of all their current and future staff. This is an area where it's important to lead by example, and I'm proud that we at the GLA have adopted neurodiversity-friendly policies. Working with our disabled staff network, we've developed a strong workplace adjustment policy which helps to address barriers neurodiverse staff face in the workplace. Staff training includes case studies on neurodiversity, and all staff have access to a neurodiversity toolkit. And the Steps Into Work programme we run with TfL helps neurodiverse students aged 16 or over to get into the world of work. Throughout all these work areas and others, it will be vital to engage with those who have lived experience and professional expertise, as well as officer engagement with national charities and user-led organisations focused on neurodiversity. My Deputy Mayor for Communities and Social Justice hosts a quarterly forum for deaf and disabled people's organisations to ensure their views and experiences inform the design and delivery of my policies and programmes. The London Recovery Board will soon launch its action plan to tackle structural inequality. We've ensured that there will be ample opportunities for individuals and organisations with expertise on neurodiversity to play a part in the delivery of this work.
With approximately 1 in 10 individuals estimated to be neurodivergent in the population at large in Greater London, that means there are approximately 900,000 Londoners with neurodivergent conditions. 1/10 of those are possibly autistic, about 88,000. And with just 16% of autistic adults being in paid work. This means that around 74,000 autistic people in London are not in paid employment. While there is limited information about other neurodivergent conditions and employment data, there are general estimates that suggest nationally up to only 20% of neurodivergent individuals are in employment. This means that there are potentially as many as 700,000 people in Greater London who are available to work if they had the right support. Neurodiversity in Business launched in Parliament in March with over 100 organisations committed to building neuro-inclusive workplaces, including most of London's largest corporates. Will you, Mr. Mayor, meet with this forum and agree how London can lead the world to improve acceptance of neurodiversity?
I'd love to. I thank you for raising the points the way you raised them, Assembly Member Boff. More than happy to. And I think your figures are stark. In fact, my figures are even more starker than yours. I had 1 in 5.
I'm a conservative, so.
But I'm grateful for you raising those points, Andrew. I'm more than happy to not just meet with the group, but I'm also, if you have the time, suggest that Dr. Debbie Wilkes-Bernard has done lots of works in this. We're launching very soon the Structural Inequalities Action Plan, and any advice you've got would be appreciated. Just to reassure you, though, we do meet the specialist groups both in London and across the country, but I'm more than happy to meet neurodiversity in business for the obvious reasons you've suggested. It's a no-brainer, but I also love your point about London being a world leader. I think we should be a world leader in this area, particularly because we've got Londoners with huge potential that's not been tapped.
In order to achieve that aim, Mr. Mayor, the Assembly back in February 2020 unanimously agreed that you should develop an all-age London-wide autism strategy to be included in your health strategy, inequalities strategy. What's happening to that?
We've gone further than that. I re-looked at the report that you talked about in preparation for Mayor's question time. Hopefully you'll welcome the Structural Inequalities Action Plan. There are 14 separate actions in there in the themes of labour market inequality. So once you've had a chance to look at that, I think it's out imminently. I don't want to give the date away in case it's wrong. If there are still issues that you think are missing, more than happy to look at what more further work we need to do. And just to reassure you, Sir Member Boff, the work that you'll see the fruits of with the action plan isn't just City Hall, is that's working across London. So it's the voluntary and community sector, it's councils, it's the private sector, but it's also the GLA functional bodies as well, TfL, Met Police Service, and so forth.
Okay, so that told me what you're doing, but it didn't talk about the strategy. What strategy is there? Because this was a specific request of the Assembly. And the reason we, as an Assembly, we requested that there be a specific strategy on neurodiversity, not just lumped in with other conditions, on neurodiversity, is that we feel it could be lost amongst the other. So where is, amongst the other conditions, where is the strategy? Are you going to have an autism strategy or a neurodiversity strategy?
I think the concern was, and again, this is one of the reasons why I'm more than happy for you to meet with Dr. Debbie Wilkes-Bernard, is neurodiversity is a small part of the social model of disabilities we're seeking to address in addressing physical, cognitive and sensory impairments that Londoners have. And I think the concern was a narrow strategy just on neurodiversity wouldn't do justice to all the other social models of disability. But again, once you've had a chance to see the action plan, which is the strategy, if you like, in what it means in implementation. If you're still unhappy, again, more than happy, it's not a closed door, just to reassure you, more than happy if you think there's more things that can be added by a strategy to discuss those with you. But I think you'll welcome the action plan.
And when will we see that action plan?
In typical civil service speak, it's very soon. Can I get back to you today to give you probably the exact date? You appreciate dates change, but I'll give you probably the date I've been told. But my briefing says shortly, very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Then we move on to the next question by Assemblymember Russell on the ongoing coronavirus risk in London.
Thank you for your question. The latest data suggests that coronavirus rates and hospitalisations are reducing in London. This is crucial to the recovery of our city and means Londoners and visitors can get out and about to enjoy all that our capital has to offer. As we do so, everyone should continue to take common sense steps to protect themselves, their loved ones and their communities from COVID-19, particularly people who are most vulnerable to serious infection. This means avoiding contact with others if you have flu-like or COVID-19 symptoms, continuing to wear face coverings in enclosed spaces such as on the transport network, maintaining good hand hygiene and letting in fresh air when meeting people indoors. Similarly, the government should be maintaining a robust testing and surveillance system to ensure fast action can be taken to protect our communities and reduce avoidable pressures on the NHS. I was deeply concerned to see reports of significant cuts to the UK Health Security Agency, which will greatly diminish our ability to identify, prevent and respond to current and future public health interests, something my health advisor, Dr. Tom Coffey, has raised in a letter to the Deputy Chief Medical Officer. It's also important that testing remains available and free to those who need it, so I was disappointed that the government ended free testing in April. Testing is especially important for clinically vulnerable Londoners, people in vulnerable settings and people in inclusion health groups such as people who are homeless. We also know that the best defence against COVID-19 is being fully vaccinated. Londoners aged 75 and over, those in care homes and those with weakened immune systems are now eligible for a spring COVID booster, and the vaccination programme was recently expanded to 5 to 15-year-olds. It's never too late to come forward for vaccination, whether it's a booster or a first dose, and I encourage all Londoners to book their vaccinations to protect themselves and others against COVID-19. As we move forward and learn to live with COVID, we must remain vigilant and flexible. This includes not being afraid to act swiftly to bring in measures in the future should they be needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to pick up first on what you said about the need for robust testing and surveillance and your disappointment that the free testing has been ended. Now, your Strategic Coordination Group, the SCG, did great work throughout the worst of the pandemic, helping Londoners to access vaccines, food banks, and opening up appropriate channels of advice and support, and doing really excellent work, kind of making sure that the boroughs were really effectively joined up and working together well. Now, right now, London is facing a new crisis, the cost of living crisis. And if you wanted to buy a lateral flow test, you can get them for about £2 a test at pharmacies. But this is expensive for people who want to be responsible and test regularly, or people who aren't covered by free tests. So if someone's got a chronic condition or lives with someone who does, they shouldn't be financially penalised just because they're trying to take care of their relative. Now, I'm wondering if there's a new procurement role for the SCG in making sure that affordable lateral flow tests are available to Londoners who need them but can't afford to pay that £2 for each test. And I just wondered, yes, if you see any role for the SCG in working with the boroughs, trying to make more affordable tests available so that people can be responsible.
Well, Chair, the role of the SCG is for strategic control from the centre, but the suggestion, I think, from the member is a sensible one. Use procurement power to try and reduce the cost. And the councils actually know who these families are who don't quite satisfy the safety net that the GPs can provide. And so can I take that away, Chair, in relation to what we could do? Just thinking together, not just the contacts we've got with the communities, those who may miss out, but also procurement power. Without making promises, I think it's a cracking idea. I'll take it away. I'm more than happy to keep the member updated with progress made in conversations with colleagues in the SCG.
Thank you. That's hugely appreciated, and I look forward to continuing to discuss that going forwards. I also wanted to think about what else we can do to protect people who are clinically extremely vulnerable, and also the NHS workforce. And I wanted to ask if you agree with Chris Hopson, the Chief Exec of NHS Providers, who said recently that we should bring back social distancing and masks. Now, I was wondering what would trigger a change that would cause you to upgrade your recommendation to wear a mask on TfL services to a requirement?
So I don't agree with that suggestion. I mean, non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPIs, are something we looked at and we look at all the time. The advice from OHID was that we followed the government's advice, and we made the one tweak in relation to advising people on Transport for London where you can't keep your distance to wear your face coverings. At the moment, the numbers, as I've said, no complacency, always being vigilant, look good. What happens is we meet regularly with public health experts in OHID, and if there are any concerns they've got in relation to the monitoring they're doing, they keep an eye on a number of surveys taking place which tell us a more accurate number of what the numbers of people with COVID is. The obvious numbers I saw as recently as yesterday was the R number, admissions in hospital, the number of deaths, those in ICU, the various surveys. No reason at all to even contemplate NPIs. But as I said in answer to the main question, I think both the government, OHID, UCSHA and ourselves keep this under review. But at this stage, I'm not of the view that we should change the current advice.
Okay, I suppose the issue is with waning immunity and the potential then for people who have been vaccinated to end up being hospitalised. It's a question of making sure that we're looking at all those factors that you're that you just raised, so that we know at what point we need to increase the instruction around mask wearing on trains. I think what I'm really worried about is that the reduced mask wearing on public transport is effectively shutting some Londoners out of everyday life. So I was contacted just this morning by a constituent who's back in the office for the first time since 2020 and was actually dismayed and upset by the lack of mask wearing on a relatively crowded underground train that they were travelling on. Now, it is an accessibility and an equality issue. So we've seen this sort of rollback of lots of the health measures in the UK and across the world, but masks are still mandatory on public transport in places like Belgium, Germany and Portugal, as well as some of the cities you visited just recently, like Los Angeles, San Francisco and New York. So I just wonder, without masks, how we can protect all Londoners and inspire confidence also in our visitors who are coming for culture rather than coronavirus.
One of the things we do know is not only is the R number down, the number of cases down, so forth, but also once the government removed the national requirement for wearing face coverings, even though we had a requirement in TfL, the people wearing a face mask reduced hugely because we couldn't enforce the wearing of face masks, which makes it more difficult later on if we decide to bring back these rules for there to be enforcement, because people assume nobody's following the rules, why should I? So later on, if we need to, we can't do so. So, as I said in answer to my previous question, both the government and ourselves, but also the experts, Akshor and OHID, are keeping this under review. At the moment, nobody's advising us to change the advice on public transport. But as I said in answer to my question, where you can't keep your social distance, the advice is to wear a face covering for the reasons you've suggested, so we can ensure everyone's got access to public transport, which is transport for all of the public, including those who have immunity that is suppressed. And I just ask people to, be aware there may be people around you who may be suppressed, have immunity that's suppressed, but also you may have the virus and not realise you've got it, because 1 out of 3 of those who have this virus don't show symptoms.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have no further questions, but I do hope that people do keep wearing their masks on public transport, because it does help people, more people, to access everyday life.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for this answer. I'm going to bring the question up of Assemblymember Hirani up the order of the paper, because it relates to coronavirus, and specifically to the question about the scrapping of the free COVID-19 testing, which was raised by Assemblymember Russell. So can we go over to that question, please?
Thank you, Chair. So far, we reached the tragic milestone of 20,000 Londoners losing their lives to COVID-19.
Did you, Mr. Mayor, want to answer the question before?
I'm guided by you. I was a bit confused as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm in your hands, Chair. I'm not really. Do you want me to answer the?
What do you?
We have grouped questions where it makes sense in terms of some health issues. It's not skullduggery on our part.
Yeah.
It just makes sense to deal with it because it's a continuous flow. That's why I think we. No, it's. I think he's grouped what was happened. Is the chair has grouped the questions. Sorry. Yes, he does. He does.
The mayor could say, "I want to answer the question," or the mayor could say, "I've given the answer already. Carry on to supplementaries." I'll leave it to the mayor.
Well, thank you. Can I take the opportunity just to say a couple of things before Senator Harani asks his supplementary question?
Yes.
Which is, I want to take the opportunity to thank again. I met this week colleagues from the Royal College of Nurses who've done a brilliant job in relation to vaccinations, which have been really, really important in relation to dealing with this really important virus. And they reminded me that testing is an important part of any effective disease prevention and control strategy, and that's one of the reasons why Assemblymember Russell was so concerned in relation to the issues in relation to government changes. I do welcome the fact that people with underlying health conditions, NHS patient-facing staff and staff in adult social care can get free tests. My view is the government must continue to ensure sufficient testing is available to protect people in vulnerable service and settings and to maintain a decent surveillance system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, Assemblymember Hirani.
Thank you, Chair. So recently we reached a tragic milestone of 20,000 Londoners losing their lives to COVID-19 over the pandemic period. These are not just figures, but they're real lives lost and real families affected all across London and even more across the whole country. In the 7 days to the 11th of May 2022, there were 81 deaths recorded in London within 28 days of a positive test. This level of COVID-19 mortality has remained the same since about February 2022. On testing, on free testing, the Labour administration in Wales has taken a more pragmatic approach and extended free tests to the end of June 2022. We're hearing a lot about living with COVID-19, but how can we live with COVID-19 if we don't know who's got it?
Yeah, and the concern is, thank you for raising that, the concern is that it's only the well-off can afford to live with COVID-19. Those that aren't well off can't. And actually, within different boroughs of London, there are different rates. They vary in relation to different boroughs. And the concern is those boroughs where there tends to be greater deprivation and where people are less likely to be able to afford to, with the limited monies they've got, made worse by the cost of living crisis, pay for a test rather than, and then find out if they've got the symptoms rather than the alternatives. I'll give you an example. In the London Borough of Enfield, the rates are 58.5 per 100,000, whereas in Hillingdon, it's 115.9 per 100,000. That's almost double from one borough to another, and that's why it is a concern. The reason why the Welsh Government extended till June the free test was because they wanted to make sure the numbers are properly down before the testing regime came down, and there is a concern. If you're well off, you can go to a local pharmacist and buy these tests. If you're not, you're taking a risk in relation to whether you've got flu-like symptoms, it could be flu, or whether you've got COVID-19. And the point is you could be passing this on to somebody whose immunity is suppressed, and they could have tragic consequences. That's why we did lobby the government for the free testing to continue unsuccessfully.
Thank you, Mayor. And moving from testing to vaccinations, less than half of eligible Londoners have received their booster jabs. How are you continuing to work with London's NHS and central government to ensure that communities are not left behind in the vaccination programme?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So I raised this in my most recent meeting with NHS leaders, and in fact my health advisor raised this to me yesterday. So the huge amount of work that we did over the last couple of years, and you'll know from your experience in Brent, particularly going out towards those communities that were hesitant to ask them to do their first vaccine, then the second one, but then there was the Evergreen offer, which is nobody's left behind, has been successful. Each week there are many people who receive their first dose. We are keen to make sure those who are eligible, as I said in my original answer, to their fourth injection ostensibly, the two vaccinations, the booster and now the other one, are receiving them. GPs are following these up, as indeed our NHS Direct. I know anecdotally, people I know above the age of 75 have received their invitations. It's really important that we raise awareness of this, the spring booster, but also we go back to those who may have missed out altogether to remind them it's never too late to receive your first vaccination. Any help members of the Assembly can give, bearing in mind your links in the community, is much appreciated by not just the NHS, but I'm sure by all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thank you for visiting the Brent Central Mosque in Willesden Green, where they had a real vaccination drive and made sure that people attending Friday prayers could also get vaccinated. So thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Assemblyman Rani. Just as a matter of explanation, the reason I allowed that to come up because it was directly related to on the subject, and I thought it would make sensible to people watching that we looked at the topic in one go. So we'll come back to the order paper, and the next question is in the name of Assemblymember Ahmed on the cost of living and London's economy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your question. First and foremost, the spiralling cost of living carries a severe economic cost for Londoners, and I'm deeply concerned about the impact of this crisis on people across the capital. Inflation is currently north of 9% and is set to be as high as 10% this year, and Londoners have already been hit with a 54% rise in energy costs last month. As a result, more Londoners already face an impossible choice between heating their homes and paying for other essentials like food, while average asking rents rose 14% in the last year, adding to the squeeze. This crisis will hit the worst of Londoners the hardest. London faces the worst inequality in the country. The lowest income 10% of Londoners take home 30% less than the lowest income 10% in the rest of the UK. And London has the highest share of its population on universal credit of any region, Welfare benefits went up last month, but only by around 3% compared to likely inflation of around 9%. This tightens the squeeze on the lowest income Londoners. The spiralling cost of living will also have a wider economic impact for London. High inflation drags down real incomes, cutting demand and slowing economic growth. Consumer confidence has turned negative in London, while business confidence about the future is also trending down. Just as economic activity in London had recovered, the cost of living crisis is now impacting spending. London's retailers face a tough year ahead, with activity in the sector likely to fall across 2022. Sharply falling real incomes across the UK prompted a drop in March GDP, with retail sales driving the fall. The Bank of England forecasts economic activity coming close to recession late this year, and unfortunately, London is unlikely to escape the damage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair. My apologies for my lateness. Mr. Mayor, thank you for reminding us that London is the region with the highest level of deprivation in the country and is therefore particularly affected by the cost of living crisis. Mr. Mayor, Londoners will be concerned that as people stop spending, businesses might lay off staff. What conversations are you having with business and about the support they need to prevent unemployment at a time when Londoners are already worried about keeping a roof over their heads?
Thank you for your question. So both the Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agarwal, and myself, and other members of the team speak regularly to businesses, business leaders and business organisations, and we're trying to do what we can with the limited resources we have. The three big fora where we get to spend time around a table with businesses is the Business Advisory Board, the London COVID Business Forum, and I'll be chairing another meeting later on this afternoon of the forum, and the London Recovery Board. The big ask business communities have in hospitality and retail is support with business rates relief. That would really help them in the short to medium term, and also discounted VAT and direct grant funding. These things help them during the worst parts of the lockdown. We're lobbying the government in relation to all three of those areas as well. And what we've done is make sure we've updated the London Business Hub, which is a one-stop shop for businesses. They can go there for real-time advice, including signposting to other sources of help. And I know small businesses have taken advantage of that in huge numbers, and we're encouraging others to as well. We listened carefully to the Chancellor's speech last night to the CBI. Unfortunately, there was nothing in there for our businesses in the short term. We're hoping that our lobbying pays off in the short to medium term.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, what action are you taking to prevent further damage to the central activities zone as people have to tighten their belts?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big concern we've got because the central activity zone, those 6 boroughs, contribute disproportionately in positive terms to the Treasury in relation to monies they bring in. The key sectors being retail, hospitality and culture. That was one of the reasons for the delegation last week to the United States of America. Our target is international tourists. Firstly, USA, that's the important place for us, then France and Germany. Realistically, because of the pandemic in the Far East, we don't think we'll be getting visitors from the Far East this year because of the rules they have there. We lost in 2020 those businesses in the CAZ north of £10 billion. If we can get some of that back this year, that would help. And frankly speaking, Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee is a really good way to attract people to our country. So we're hoping to make the most of that. We're also working closely with the 6 boroughs in relation to a joint action plan, and we're also working with Central London Forward in relation to what we can do together in relation to the CAZ. The good news is other parts of London appreciate the importance of the CAZ, and so London Council is working really closely with us as well. But we are worried about potential an existential threat to our city centre if the CAZ doesn't recover sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Ahmed. The next question is by Assemblymember Caroline Pigeon on the performance of the Metropolitan Police Service.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. I'm committed to supporting our Met Police Service while also challenging them to improve, holding them to account and ensuring that Londoners receive the police service they deserve. We should be in no doubt about the scale and complexity of the task the MPS faces. Keeping a major global city safe is not easy. From policing global events and cracking down on organised crime gangs to tackling crime in our local communities. Met Police officers do an incredible job, often in extremely difficult circumstances. This job has been made harder by over a decade of government austerity. I've always been clear that you can't get people safe on the cheap. Consistent underfunding has put frontline policing at risk, and the government needs to, once and for all, provide the £159 million funding shortfall the Home Office has itself agreed the Met Police Service needs. Despite these challenges, London is bucking the national trend by stabilising crime levels that continue to increase in England and Wales. Gun crime offences are now at the lowest in years, knife crime and burglary are both down, and the MPS continues to tackle violence against women and girls. In a recent week of action, 69 arrests were made for stalking and harassment. But there is much more work to do. A recent series of deeply concerning incidents have seriously damaged public trust and confidence in our police. The murder of Sarah Everard by a serving officer, criminal activities by officers at the scene of the murders of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, and the findings of the IRPC into the appalling misconduct of some officers at Charing Cross Police Station have all disturbed and distressed Londoners, me included. I've been clear that the new Commissioner must demonstrate that they understand the scale of the cultural problems within the Met Police Service and the urgency with which they must be addressed. They must be determined to earn back the trust and confidence of Londoners, and I'll continue to oversee and scrutinise the delivery of these changes through my police and crime plan. The MPS contains many brilliant officers and staff who share my aspirations and who I know are keen to play their part in ensuring the bond with the communities they serve is not only restored but made stronger than ever.
Thank you. As you referenced, to tackle crime effectively, the Met must have the confidence and trust of the public. And you claim that you lost confidence in the last Commissioner because you were not satisfied with the plan she outlined to root out unacceptable behaviour and rebuild Londoners' trust in the Met. What was specifically missing in the Commissioner's plans that you wanted to see?
There's twofold. One was a proper understanding of the cultural issues that were illustrated by the various examples. I mentioned a couple of them. There are many more. The list isn't exhaustive. So you need to understand the scale of the problem before you have the prognosis of how you're going to address that. And part of that is the plan to win back trust and confidence. So it's twofold. One is a plan to address the deep cultural issues, and two is a plan to win back trust and confidence. And in the representations made up until the day when the Commissioner stepped aside, I don't think those plans addressed either of those two issues.
Thank you. That's helpful to know. As you mentioned, in recent months, we have seen several high-profile cases that have contributed to a fall in public confidence. But data from your own office shows that public confidence has been steadily falling since June 2017, when it was 69%, to just 51% in December 2021. Do you accept there has been a steady fall in police confidence since 2017? And
Yes.
what specifically will you work on with the new Commissioner to reverse this fall in public confidence?
So the numbers you refer to are from the Public Attitude Survey, and we've deliberately widened the scope of the Public Attitude Survey to take on board more, both in quantitative terms, more Londoners in terms of PAS, but also other issues as well. In some parts of London, the reduction has been greater than others, and being frank, those are the more diverse parts of London where there are more black Londoners. And it's also fallen in relation to the views of women Londoners as well. One of the jobs of the Commissioner working with all of us has to be to make that graph, firstly plateau and then return upwards. And there's a policing reason why it's important, because we police by consent. How can somebody be encouraged to come forward when they've been a victim of crime? And I've met victims of crime, including the victims of serious offences, not giving statements to the police because of a lack of confidence. You've got the issue of witnesses not coming forward because they lack confidence. There's a separate issue in relation to people not wanting to sit on juries or joining the police service because of a lack of confidence. So it affects all of us, not just diverse communities or women, if certain parts of London lack the trust and confidence in our police that they're needed. Then you add to that community leaders, people who work with young people not coming forward as well. That's a big issue.
Okay, thank you. So you're accepting that this is a big issue for the new Commissioner. A specific issue I wanted to raise with you. The Met has continued problems with solving crimes. Sanction detection rates at just 8.5% across all crimes between January and April of this year, and worse, of course, as you're well aware, in areas like rape, where it is just 5%. Proper storage of evidence is key, but the recent HMI report into the Met stated that arrangements for the storage of property and exhibits were especially dire. I mean, damning words. Were you aware that evidence storage had been read for some time on the Met's own risk register? And what action are you personally going to take to ensure the Met urgently improves evidence storage to ensure it meets national guidance and improves its detection rates?
No, neither the Deputy Mayor or myself were aware until we saw the HMI report into counter-corruption that arose from the independent panel inquiry into Daniel Morgan about some of the examples that the HMI report in their report showed. These are post-Morgan, by the way. These aren't going back to the 80s or 90s. These are post, and that's why they were so serious. And you've read, I'm sure, the report from the HMI, which in your words, were damning. And so that's another issue that the police need to address, and it is a serious issue for the reasons you've said in relation to evidence, right? Getting better sanction detection rates and convictions, but actually also to address perceptions, if not reality, of corruption. Because that's the point of the HMI report, was they were looking into counter-corruption in the police service as a consequence of the issues raised in Morgan. So it's not simply the issue of evidentially the impact it has, but also in relation to concerns around corruption.
Lovely, thank you. I'll pick this up outside. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Assemblymember Pigeon. Assemblymember Roger wants to come in at this point, Mr Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question was going to be following a very similar line of questioning to Assemblymember Pigeon, so I think it will maybe save some time and save the Mayor's voice if I pull the question and ask as a supplementary. So, Mr Mayor, just picking up on some of the points that Assemblymember Pigeon and yourself discussed, the previous Commissioner's letter of the 4th of February, she outlined a number of ways in which she was proposing to tackle the issue of cultural problems within the Met. She was going to be, for example, introducing a new command assessment of standards, and linked to that 100-strong team of officers and staff under a commander rebuilding trust. Would those reforms be something you'd expect the next Commissioner to carry forward?
Sure. I don't want to tie the hands of the next Commissioner, who the Home Secretary will be appointing shortly, but it's really important that all police officers, even those who are dedicated, decent and brave, understand why this is important. And so it's for the new Commissioner to come up with a plan to address those two issues, and I'm sure a new Commissioner will take the very best of the things the previous Commissioner may have been doing, rejecting those that he or she he doesn't think is appropriate. But I think it'd be unwise for any new leader to discard ideas from the previous person just because they're from the previous person. So they shouldn't be written off just because the author is not the new person in the job.
I absolutely agree. And so many of these issues seem to have come out of inappropriate use of social media, and particularly WhatsApp groups seem to have become an unfortunate feature of this, and the contents of those groups having been made public, they then further damage trust and confidence in the police, which, as we all know, is declining. Would you expect the new Commissioner to have a specific plan to deal with WhatsApp groups and social media use amongst police, above and beyond the existing policies of the
I think you raise a really important point, and I've discussed this with officers. What officers say to me is, actually, what you're seeing now, I'm paraphrasing, so what you're seeing now are the sort of conversations we may well have been having, not themselves individually, police officers may have been having in the pub in yesteryear, or in the canteen in yesteryear. But because now the rise of WhatsApp, we will have conversations in real time of things that we probably would have had face to face. And so the question is, are these conversations now being written down that we otherwise wouldn't have known about, have always taken place, or are things getting worse? And those are the sort of conversations that have been had with me, and that's one of the jobs of the new Commissioner to is the technology an issue? I don't think it is. Is that technology now alerting us to things we otherwise wouldn't have done? Question mark. Number 3, there's a separate discussion which I know the Met Police Service and the Police Federation are looking into, is the use of mobile devices, the benefits and the disbenefits. So there's a whole host of issues, and you're right, it's some of these have been brought to the fore by WhatsApp, which the technology wasn't there even 5 years ago. There was a lot less use of WhatsApp, particularly during service time. And so those are some of the things I know the National Policing team are looking into as well. There are all sorts of other issues about, can you make it an implied term of a contract that you'll have access to somebody's personal mobile phone? Question mark. It's a question mark. And so the issue you've raised is far bigger than a simple issue of WhatsApp being the cause of these problems. I'm not suggesting you're saying that. And so these are big issues, and I think that's why important for the Home Secretary to accept this is a national policing concern as well. It's not just a Met Police issue. We shouldn't assume it's just a Met Police issue. And I'm looking forward to the National Police Chiefs Council and others taking part of this debate with solutions as well.
Interesting, thank you. I also speak to my local police officers, and at all ranks that I've spoken to, there is there's a disappointment and a concern about the manner of the previous Commissioner's departure. And I'm afraid there is some suspicion now about, I'm afraid, your office and the Deputy Mayor for Policing amongst police officers. Do you accept that there's a job to do for you to rebuild the trust of the Met Police itself? Because having those officers on board is going to be absolutely crucial if we are actually going to change the culture in the Met.
When you've got a job like being the Commissioner of the Police Service, it's not a popularity contest. Your interest should be consumers and producers. Producers being police officers, consumers being the public. Your job is not simply to be popular with the 43,000 people you employ, but to make sure that 10 million Londoners and those who visit our city have confidence in you as well. I don't resolve from my views in relation to the inverted commas plan the Commissioner had, and I fully support my Deputy Mayor.
Absolutely, but do you agree that you have a job to rebuild the trust of the police? I appreciate it's not about popularity, but it's about trust. And if the police do not trust the directives coming from City Hall, then the culture will just simply not be reformed.
Well, I've gone on record on a number of occasions, not least on the day when the Commissioner decided to step aside, to place my thanks to the thousands of decent, dedicated, brave officers, some of whom look after me on a daily basis and look after you and your constituents. They are more impatient for change in the police service in relation to the concerns that have been raised publicly on a number of occasions. I think Caroline Pidgeon's question elicited some of the examples that have led to lack of trust and confidence in the police service. It lets them down, actually, when you see the graphs and the public attitude survey showing fewer and fewer Londoners having confidence in the police service. Of course, we want the police to have confidence in leadership, including in those politicians as well. But that doesn't mean that you as a politician always seek to garner popularity with those who work for you and with you. I want a situation where police officers have got trust and confidence not just in the Commissioner, but also in City Hall and in politicians in Parliament, but also Londoners and those who visit our city have confidence in the police service, politicians as well. I think there is a piece of work to be done. I think it's fair for you to raise that as a challenge in relation to the responsibility that we all have to make sure that relationship is better. You'll have seen, as I have, the comments from the chair of the Metropolitan Police Federation, who, in my eyes, seems to have his head in the sands in relation to the concerns the public has. That's for him, in relation to being in denial. I'm not in denial in relation to the challenges we face. One of the jobs we've got to do is make sure that the Home Secretary appoints the right Commissioner who understands the challenges and works incredibly hard with all of us to address some of the issues that have been shown up in the recent past.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No more questions from me.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the next question is by Assemblymember Cooper, who will be joining us remotely, and it's on the ULEZ expansion consultation launch.
This is challenging today, going back and forward in the Lever Arch file.
It is.
Don't worry, it's nobody's fault. I think it's 1488. Thank you.
It is.
Thank you.
It is 1488.
Thank you. And just to add to the, and she joins us on the screen rather than if I just to add to the challenge.
Yes.
Good morning, Assemblymember Cooper. I'm determined that we make even more progress in addressing the triple challenges of reducing transport emissions to protect the health of Londoners, working towards the net zero carbon emissions, and cutting congestion. There is more to do, particularly in outer London. More than half of the 500,000 Londoners who suffer from asthma live in outer London, and all areas of London still exceed safe levels of pollution. If no further action is taken to reduce air pollution, the cost to the NHS and social care system in London is estimated to be £10.4 billion by 2050. This is also a matter of social justice. Londoners on lower incomes and from black, Asian and ethnic minority communities are more likely to live in areas more affected by air pollution, but are less likely to own a car. I want to hear views from all Londoners and all London's diverse communities as part of this consultation. TfL will deliver a comprehensive marketing and engagement plan which will ensure as many people as possible are aware of the consultation. This will include radio adverts across London and the home counties, national and regional press adverts, targeted commercial van and car drivers, and online podcast and YouTube advertising. Inclusion and accessibility are at the heart of TfL's approach to consultation. Consultation materials will be provided in easy-read format and in Braille and large format, accompanied by a British Sign Language video. A consultation phone line will be available to address questions from people unable to access information online. TfL has undertaken extensive stakeholder mapping to ensure that engagement is targeted at the right community groups, including local accessibility and parent groups, NHS staff, patient groups, and patient transport organisations and third sector organisations, including local charities and voluntary groups. TfL will also engage with schools, faith groups, business groups and elected representatives, including Assembly members represented affected areas. These organisations and representatives will be contacted from the consultation launch to have their say. They'll also be offered the opportunity to attend briefing sessions with TfL to make sure they get the information they need and that their voices are heard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and it's good to hear that there's going to be such diverse and widespread consultation. I remember back to 6 years ago in 2016 when we first started the consultation and discussion of air quality in London about the original ULEZ implemented in central London and then expanded currently to the north and south circular. And one of the things that concerns me is I think there is still a view in some parts of outer London that the issues relating to poor air quality don't affect people in outer London as much as in inner London. And I think it's going to be really important to make sure that information is widespread to all those who are going to be contributing. How will you make sure that that information is widely propagated so that people do understand why this is even being considered at all?
Yeah, it's a really important point, Chair, raised by the member. And we've got to get across, this isn't just an environmental crisis, it's a health crisis. One of the things that we've done is learned from previous consultations, and I hope you'll agree, this iteration of consultation is far wider than previous ones. But if members of the Assembly, particularly those who represent outer London constituencies, have got advice or views, TfL will be more than happy to listen to those as well. I hope you're a bit reassured in relation to the breadth of techniques used by TfL to take this forward, that they have learned the lessons of the past. I think we've learned as well, actually, in relation to how we get across the explanation for why ULEZ as a policy has been expanded. And we can point to, actually, what we couldn't do in 2016-17, the evidence of central London ULEZ and inner London ULEZ in relation to the progress we've made and the improvements there have been. But I think you're right that we've got to make sure people understand that this is actually addressing health inequalities as well as the environmental economic issues that the policy also does as well. It doesn't just solve one problem, it addresses a number.
I think one issue for many people in outer London, just as I remember when the original scheme was coming in, is going to be about access to scrappage, because obviously transitioning from people's individual arrangements for travelling around at the moment to contributing in a different way to air improvement is going to be really important. And I just wondered if you could tell us whether or not this time we are going to get some support to Londoners from government. There has been support to so many other cities. Are we going to get help this time? It's a massive problem for lots of people in across the whole of London. What help can we expect?
Well, it's just worth reminding the government that actually the government won't meet the targets, the legal targets they've got to meet unless London meets our targets. So it's in the government's interest, aside from the health, economic, social and environmental reasons, to work with us. To avoid falling foul of legal challenges, it's in the government's interest for London to succeed. You'll be aware that the £61 million in the scrappage scheme that we paid Londoners to take more than 15,000 vehicles off the road came solely from TfL and London. We got no support from the government, unlike other cities across the country with their clean air zones. We're lobbying the government in relation to the long-term capital deal with them to ensure there is some money for a scrappage scheme. We think the government would welcome us expanding ULEZ because it saves the NHS money increases productivity. It also means the government can meet its legal obligations. And so those are some of the conversations the Commissioner and his team are having with Secretary of State for Transport, Number 10, and the Treasury. As of yet, that we've got 6 weeks until the capital deal comes to an end. Those conversations are ongoing. We don't know the outcome of those conversations, but we are hoping there is support from the government in relation to scrappage schemes so that small business people, low-income families, disabled Londoners, charities and many others can benefit from a scrappage scheme that enables them to transition from a polluting vehicle to one that's ULEZ compliant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the next question is 1663 in the name of Assembly Member Bailey and is titled Value for Money.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. My top priority continues to be keeping Londoners safe, and I have a duty to secure the efficiency and effectiveness of the Metropolitan Police Service. My Office for Policing and Crime and the Met Police Service pursue value for money in everything they do. But you don't have to just take my word for it. There are independent external assessments of how well the MPS now uses its resources and achieves value for money. Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, in their police efficiency and effectiveness reports, have said the MPS is good at making use of the resources available to it. Its latest published report states that, and I quote, the MPS is good at meeting current demand and using resources. It works closely with other organisations to understand demand, end quote. It also says that the MPS, quotes, understands what the police wants and uses this feedback to change the service it provides. It sets and manages its budgets well. The external auditors annual report notes that, and I quote, MOPAC and the MPS have put in place effective arrangements to improve economy, efficiency and effectiveness. This includes making effective use of data to inform business decisions and using a performance framework and other tools to drive organisational performance to meet strategic objectives. The auditors recognised that the MPS has already undertaken considerable work to review all arrangements around transformation and change management. Because of the government's cuts in policing, the MPS has already delivered significant savings in excess of £1 billion since 2012-2013 through a variety of programmes. The MPS transformation programme is one of the largest seen in the UK public sector. It's combined significant efficiencies in the MPS estate with investments to optimise operational activity and increase productivity through streamlining central headquarter functions. Significant savings have also been achieved by improving commercial awareness. For example, £300,000 of savings has been achieved by cancelling obsolete IT systems, with a further £6.6 million in the pipeline. But providing value for money cannot make up for the significant underfunding the MPS has had to endure. The government's police uplift programme did not allocate the 6,000 additional officers that the previous Commissioner judged to be necessary. I continue to lobby for a greater allocation of resources to London policing and call on the government to address the shortfall in the national and international capital cities grant, which by the Home Office's own admission currently underfunds the Met Police Service by £159 million per year.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you tell me what level of resource is being spent on improving sanction detection rates? Because the trend is downward across many indicators, and we'll want to focus on where value can be gained.
So there's no carve-out in relation to the MPS budget for sanction detection rates, because it's not just a policing issue. It also means greater joined upness with the CPS. It also to do with the backlog in relation to courts. I think there are 16,000 trials currently waiting in the Crown Court. So it's a cross-CJS function in relation to improve sanction detection rates rather than a carve-out in relation to the MPS's own budget.
Is MOPAC doing any particular piece of work on helping to improve sanction detection rates in general? Because that figure might be easier to identify.
Yeah, the best example where MOPAC's doing work with sanction detection rates in relation to violence against women and girls, I think Caroline Pigeon referred to the really poor conviction rates on rape. That's a good example where, with the combination of the ISVAs we're funding and the IDVAs, these are the independent domestic violence advisors and the sexual violence advisors, that helps keep attrition in relation to allegations of sexual offences. So having an advisor with you when you made a complaint is a good way of keeping that person involved in the prosecution, which helps with the sanction detection rates. That's the best example in relation to specific work MOPAC's doing in relation to sanction detection rates. There are other examples. So now when it comes to even if you report a burglary online, whereas in the past you weren't guaranteed a visit from a police officer. Now, if you want a visit from a police officer, they'll come from a burglary. That also assists in relation to keeping a person involved in a potential prosecution, because it may just be you're reporting it for a reference number in relation to an insurance claim. So those aren't specifically for sanction detection rates, but they'll help in relation to sanction detection rates.
Could we ask, your focus has been rightly on violent crime, that's correct, over your time of being mayor, but could we ask for something, a MOPAT, to do specific work around sanction detection rates, around things like robbery, knife crime, etc.? Because you pointed out what's being done around rape and there's some success there. If we were to do another specific piece of work to help sanction detection rates in those areas, do you believe it would help?
Chair, I have no problems at all in the Police and Crime Committee, which may be the correct forum for these conversations to take place, to speak to the Acting Commissioner. I know he's keen on particularly robbery as well. You'll appreciate during the pandemic we saw some improvements there, because there are fewer reports of robbery, because there are a few people in the West End, for argument's sake. Whether we can build on that progress going forward as well. I'm more than happy to ask the Acting Commissioner with the Deputy Mayor to come along to the Police and Crime Committee to discuss other things we can be doing to improve sanction detection rates. Just to reassure, it's also a national initiative as well. I know the Home Secretary is quite concerned in relation to nationally across the 43 forces. The SDS is not being as high as they should be, so I'm more than happy for them to come back to the Police and Crime Committee to explore with the committee what more work can be done there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, sorry, Member De Bell.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the link between value for money and fair funding, I think you alluded to in your answer, I'm particularly interested in where we are with the, what's it called, national and international capital grants issue, where we are subsidising what, in effect, we should be getting in receipt from central government. You know, quite frankly, they are shortchanging Londoners and shortchanging the police, and in some ways holding back the police from making further improvements, as the Assembly member has identified. We could reuse that money, redistribute if we got fair funding. Where are we on those issues, given that the government said we needed more money and then chose not to give more money to London?
I think you'll see, thank you for your question, you'll see over the next few weeks when you see the numbers of people in London celebrating Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, the additional pressures on our police force, because they've got to be keeping us all safe in relation to not just avoiding crowd fluctuations that can lead to, heaven forbid, a Hillsborough-type situation, but also, let me be frank, and I'm not giving any secrets, it's clearly a target for terrorists, right? All these thousands of people gathering in the centre of our city. That's just an example of the pressures on a police force that polices the capital city, sporting events, protests, demonstrations, parliamentarians, so forth, so forth. And all these lead to extractions from other parts of our city to make sure the numbers are there in the centre of our city. We keep on making these points to the government. Privately, both ministers and the Home Office accept these points, and so we're hopeful that there'll be some progress going forward in relation to announcements from the government. In the most recent SR, no good news there in relation to the NICs. And just to underscore your point, the Home Office have accepted, these aren't, so our figure was higher than 159 million. That's the figure the government accepts. We've actually written off the additional £100 million we think is on top of that. We're taking the government's figure, although it's less than we think it is. No progress yet, but that's an example of a short changing of our capital city every year.
And the impact on that, if we add that, if the government gave us the money that we're entitled to, then we could redistribute that into the areas that the previous Assembly member was looking to actually try and drive those sanction detection rates up. It is a case of that, and it is a case that money makes a difference in terms of some of these issues.
When there's fewer resources, you've got to allocate resources according to your priorities. So even though, thanks to City Hall funding, we now have more police officers than we had in 2010, our population has grown by 1.4 million, right? So the ratio of police officers to Londoner went down to 1 to 3 back in 2010. It's now going down to 1.3.3, 1.3.4. It was 1 to 4. And so we need more police officers, and you'll improve sanction detection rates if there are more members of the team to do that sort of work. And you've got to prioritise the resources. And I never get involved in operational matters. I shouldn't. It's a decision for experienced officers, but not unreasonably, they've got finite resources, they've got to ration those resources. And so, of course, if we got the funding that we deserve, that the Home Office accepts, you'd see sanction detection rates without any doubt improving because there have been more officers, including back office staff, to do that work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next question, 1661, has been withdrawn. So we go over to the question of 1462 in the name of Assembly Member Baker on TfL and financial sustainability.
Thank you, Chair, for that question. Prior to the pandemic, TfL was on a path to break even on the cost of operations, maintenance, financing and core renewals, having taken almost £1 billion out of its net operating costs since I first became Mayor in 2016. It is only because of the COVID pandemic that TfL required any emergency government funding. A condition of the emergency funding settlement has required TfL to be financially sustainable again by April 2023. The funding agreements have also recognised that TfL will always need government support for major capital enhancements and major renewals, such as replacement of life-expired rolling stock and signalling. This type of government support for investment is required by all major transport networks around the world. The latest TfL budget published in March shows the need for around £1.2 billion of emergency support in this financial year, which is significantly less than previous years during the pandemic. It also shows a balanced budget for 2023-2024 onwards without any government emergency support. However, in the absence to date of government support for capital investment, TfL has been forced to budget on a managed decline scenario. This would mean bus cuts of 18% and tube cuts of 9%, which would be disastrous for London. This would also be disastrous for the whole country because TfL contracts contribute around £7 billion to the UK economy and supports tens of thousands of jobs around the country. It is critical that the government agrees to provide longer-term capital funding for major enhancements and renewals. This is the only way TfL will be able to afford to invest in the future of London's public transport networks and avoid the service cuts that will be inevitable under managed decline. The negotiations with the government are currently going very slowly, and we need to break out of the cycle of short-term piecemeal deals and move towards a serious, sustainable approach that will ensure London's transport network can go on meeting the needs of our city.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are the lights okay? That's fine.
I think we're still...
all run around.
Still okay. Webcast.
I should probably move on because this is probably coming off our time. Thanks for the update, Mr. Mayor. I want to specifically ask further about the capital settlement because there was a specific timescale around agreeing a capital settlement in time for the start of the 2022-23 financial year that was set down by government in negotiations. And obviously, you've outlined it's absolutely crucial. TfL wants to use settlement, for example, to electrify the bus fleet. This is, essential to our targets to get to net zero. Can you update us in more detail about what's happening with that settlement?
I don't want to give a running commentary, but they're going very slowly. The government's provided TfL with a high-level technical proposal for a potential capital support framework, but there's no indication yet as to any figures. And without the figures, TfL can't make the planning scenarios that they need to make. So there are only just under 6 weeks left to go before the current capital deal expires, and it really is no way to run a £10 billion business where you're waiting. You've got 6 weeks to go. Just imagine the contracts we can't enter into, the deals we can't make, the savings we can't make, because at the moment we don't know how much money we're going to get post 5.5 weeks' time.
So there are conversations going on, but those aren't to the detail that's moving. Yeah. Thank you. I want to return to the question around excellent public, the part of the question, how we maintain an excellent public transport network while moving to financial sustainability, and specifically around buses and the bus action plan that was published by TfL recently. And bus action plan says we must not let the short-term unprecedented uncertainty around demand and funding distract us from this essential, clear, positive vision for 2030. This vision is within our grasp. Is there a danger the bus action plan will remain a vision and not a reality, given that requirement to be financially sustainable?
Oh, without a doubt. Look, so at the moment, unless there's a long-term capital deal with the from the government commensurate with TfL's plans. We're talking about an almost 20% cut in our buses. So at the moment, what we planned was for a 4% reduction in buses, because in central London there's some duplication, particularly with the new Elizabeth line opening up next week. So some of the buses we could take from central London to outer London, where there's a bigger need for buses, not least because there are fewer tube lines in outer London. We're also encouraging more people in outer London to use buses rather than driving their cars. But also we've noticed that in the recent past, there's been greater recovery in outer London in bus usage, but it's not outer London to inner London. It's people working from home using the buses to go shopping or whatever. And so there is a demand in outer London for our buses. So the idea, we go to a managed decline scenario where we're reducing by 18-90% our bus usage across London would be catastrophic to, in particular, outer London. And that's why we're trying to explain to the government that it's in nobody's interest, to be making those sorts of savings, 8-9% in tubes, 18-19% in our buses. And so the bus action plan, unless we're careful, will just be a vision rather than an action plan, a reality.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I know that there's lots of people in outer London who are really looking forward to engaging on what we can do to improve the bus services. So hopefully we'll get to do that. That's all my questions. Thanks, Chair.
The next question, Mr. Mayor, is on 1652, on Vision Zero, by Assembly Member Garrett.
Thank you. It's quite nice for it to be in order. Thank you for your question. Sadly, too many people continue to be injured and killed on London's roads, and every death and serious injury is a tragedy. Safer streets are fundamental to my vision of a city where people can travel easily, sustainably and actively, and where the noise, pollution, carbon and community impacts of motor transport are minimised. Vision Zero is an internationally recognised approach adopted by cities across the world. Since introducing the Vision Zero goal, both deaths and serious injuries in London have fallen faster than the national average. By 2020, the number of people killed or seriously injured on London's roads had reduced by 52% against the government baseline. Particularly vulnerable groups such as children saw a 74% reduction in deaths and serious injuries over that period. In short, the Vision Zero goal is helping us to make our streets safer. As part of this work, we've introduced the world's first direct vision standard, which has led to around 112,000 heavy goods vehicles already being fitted with improved safety technologies. We've also introduced a groundbreaking bus safety standard, mandating the latest safety technologies and design on all new buses. As a result, more than 1,900 buses across London now have intelligence speed assistance. The number of people injured on or by a bus has fallen significantly in line with our targets. TfL has continued work on its Healthy Streets programme while making improvements to 43 of London's most dangerous junctions, introduced 260 kilometres of cycle lanes and introduced safer speeds on TfL roads. TfL take an active role in investigating serious bus incidents with local authorities and bus operators, aiming to find the root cause of each incident. The entire bus safety programme is evidence-led, and TfL is continuously adding to this evidence base. This evidence-based approach is delivering results, but despite this progress, our goal is zero, and there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. Collective action is needed now to eliminate deaths and serious injuries from London's roads. TfL, London's boroughs and the police are all intensifying efforts to achieve this critical goal by continuing to make our streets safe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, my question was whether it's a serious endeavour or whether it's a publicity stunt. And the reason I asked that question, the figure you quoted there, about 52% reduction, the baseline that you've used is the classic example of firing an arrow and then painting a target around it, which is what people do when they want to have a publicity statement and not when they're making a serious progress. So the baseline that you have, 2004 to 2009, you're claiming the credit for your Vision Zero for all of the improvements since then. So that during that baseline, just to take us back a little history tour, this is when Ken Livingstone was the mayor. It's when Tony Blair, for most of your baseline period, was the Prime Minister, which is quite a while ago now, and all of the improvement that's happened since then, you're claiming credit for in the figures that you state. Wouldn't it be more honest to baseline your figure of the improvement that you claim for your programme from a comparison with the years immediately before your programme started?
So, I mean, the aggregate numbers speak for themselves. I'm not sure your analogy or metaphor of the arrow and the bullseye works.
Well, look, perhaps if I can clarify. So, yeah. Steve Reed, one of the MPs in my patch, is the Shadow Lord Chancellor. for most of the period, I don't know how much credit you give him for the improvements in road safety in London. For most of the time when improvements that you're claiming credit for were happening, you were the Shadow Lord Chancellor. You're a member of Parliament, you were not involved in this organisation. So between 2010 and 2015, large improvements, most of the improvements that you're claiming in road safety happened during that period. And you're now claiming them for your Vision Zero project. Does that not seem dishonest?
Yeah, but given the figures for 2019 and 2020...
Compared with the baseline when Tony Blair was Prime Minister. That was the comparison that you're... When you publish your figures, you compare them with the baseline, which is 2004 to 2009.
Right.
So why did you choose that period?
That's the period that DFT have been using, and that's the
but you're not obligated to follow that. You could publish figures based on.
So we should ignore what the DFT.
No, you can give them the figures that they request. But when you tell Londoners about the improvement that you're making,
right,
shouldn't you compare it with the years before you started and the years during your term of office? Wouldn't that be more honest?
But I've just given you the 2019-2020 figures, which by
okay,
definition...
but the 2020 figures are during the pandemic.
Right.
When you publish figures for Vision Zero, will we be seeing then a comparison with, say, a baseline of 2015 to 2017, which was just before it started?
Right. I think there's a separate point which I'm willing to take on board that we should be challenging, that we shouldn't try and just to satisfy an arbitrary target by using figures so we can always tick, tick, tick. I'm happy to go away, Chair, to have stretching targets if that's... I think that's a good
honest
challenge.
Targets is what I'm asking for.
Well, no, I mean, no. We follow the DFT advice. You're now unhappy because we're doing well against the DFT advice, right? What I'm saying to you is, I take the pat on the back, and I'm willing to have more stretching
the pat on the back goes to Mayor Johnson, who was mayor during that period.
Well, that would be a good point. That would be a good point if numbers were going up. Numbers are going down, which means the credit goes to Mayor Khan, not Mayor Johnson, in relation to deaths and serious injuries. Listen, I'm willing to go halfway. I'm willing to say I think we should have stretching targets, right? Because both of our aspirations are to reduce deaths or serious injuries. The knockabout stuff you can just park for a second. What I'm saying to you is I'm willing to come back, Chair, with more stretching targets, because I think you make a fair point in relation to our expectations in 2022 should be different to what the DFT asks us to do with the baseline figure. I think that's a fair observation if you park the knockabout stuff.
So is that the baseline that we'll now see published, the baseline of when you started your Vision Zero programme?
No. What I've said I want to do is look away and we can have more stretching targets because quite clearly we're meeting the objective set by DFT and what Mayor Johnson was doing. I'm saying let's try and be more stretching because I want 0 deaths sooner rather than later. So what I'm saying to you is in the spirit of working together, because hopefully both of us want to see reduced deaths rather than knockabout stuff.
And honest claims about improvements that you've made. And not
if he's going to start being silly, Chair, I'll respond by saying we're making progress, we've made better progress than the previous guy, and I'll carry on doing better than the previous guy.
I think, Senator Garrett, you've asked the question, the Mayor's answered it. Let's move on. The next question is number 1610. Is the name of Assembly Member Prince on motorcycle safety.
Thank you for the question. Reducing risk to the most vulnerable road users in London is central to my Vision Zero action plan. People riding motorcycles, including mopeds and scooters, make up only 3% of vehicle kilometres, but tragically accounted for 32% of people killed on London's roads in 2020. Despite severe funding constraints caused by COVID and the lack of a deal with the government, TfL continues to invest in safety improvements that benefit all vulnerable road users, including those using motorcycles and scooters. The vast majority of TfL bus lanes are open to motorcyclists, and many have recently been made operational 24 hours a day. Where the bus lanes are under control of the relevant borough, TfL has been working with councils to encourage them to open their bus lanes to motorcyclists. I know that the Assembly Member has campaigned for this, and I thank him for his support. TfL's Safer Junctions programme has delivered tangible results for all users, with an average 18% reduction in injuries to motorcyclists at these junctions. TfL funds marketing campaigns to remind road users to look out for motorcyclists. It also continues to offer a range of free safety training courses to help motorcyclists stay safe and has delivered over 4,000 motorcycle training and beyond CBT skills for delivery riders courses. TfL also works closely with the MPS to deliver bike-safe training. However, we know there is more that can and needs to be done. Motorcycles with engines under 125cc require the lowest minimum standard of training of any motorised vehicle on the road. I don't believe the current national training regime is sufficient to equip riders for the risks and challenges of driving vehicles capable of speeds of up to 80 miles per hour in a complex urban environment, whilst keeping both the rider and other road users safe. The food delivery industry has more than doubled since the beginning of 2020, which has led to a rise in new registrations of small engine scooters. But we know that the vast majority of these riders have only completed basic training and so are riding on learner plates. TfL has been directly engaging with the companies involved, encouraging them to subscribe to a common minimum standard to keep their riders safe and to reduce the risks motorcyclists face on London's roads. I'm determined to reduce danger for all road users, and TfL will continue to do everything it can to ensure that all riders are safe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that very comprehensive answer and all the work that you are doing around motorcycle safety in the regular meetings that we have. Could I just quickly also thank you for the progress that's being made at Gallows Corner. It looks as though we may have a solution there. You did come and visit us within the first month of you being elected and said you would do something, albeit it's taken 6 years. It does look like we're making progress, so thank you for that. This is not a trick question, but are you aware of the organisation called New Rider Hub? Are you aware of that, Mr. Mayor?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No.
It's an organisation that offers free online training and advice to new motorcyclists and scooter users. And it's something that... so first I'd wonder if you'd be able to help raise awareness of this organisation because of the good work it does, but also they have this new Young Rider Forum, and there's a number of organisations that belong to it, but unfortunately neither the GLA, Met nor TfL have representation on the group. Is it possible that you could look into that and hopefully get some representation on that forum too, please?
Chair, my experience is the member normally has good suggestions. I'm more than happy to take this up and ask the Deputy Mayor to look into this.
Yeah, we'll write to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, cheers. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that. The next question, Mr. Mayor, on 1493, we've already dealt with that. So we'll go over to the next question, which is my name, on new hospitals for London, and I'm going to hand over the chair to Assemblymember Boff.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, your response, please.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. London has some of the world's most advanced healthcare facilities and best staff, but it also has some of the worst hospital buildings in Britain, with some just trying to keep the rain out. I want everyone to have the best patient experience no matter where they live in London, with high quality health services in buildings that are appropriate for delivering 21st century healthcare. I understand that good progress is being made locally on individual projects in London like Whipps Cross and Epsom and St Helier, which were identified as priorities in the London Estate Strategy. It's now vitally important that the new hospitals that have received planning approval are built as soon as possible. Although I have no powers over healthcare in the capital, I've been doing everything I can to progress these schemes. My planning officers have engaged proactively with stakeholders to resolve strategic planning matters on the Whipps Cross and Moorfields planning applications. Similarly, on the Hillingdon scheme, my officers are engaging positively with the planning authority to resolve planning issues. These programmes are led and managed by Department for Health and Social Care. Delays do not come from the local hospital programme themselves, but from the time taken by the government to progress the national programme's business case. Given the advanced state of development of some London schemes, the teams involved are confident that once the national programme is ready, we should see a significant shift in pace. The government has committed to funding 48 new hospitals around the country. This includes the 5 hospital schemes in London, Whipps Cross, Hillingdon, Epsom, St Helier and Sutton, St Mary's and Charing Cross, plus the earlier Moorfields rebuild, all in desperate need of the promised cash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned Hillingdon Hospital, which is in my constituency and in the constituency of the Prime Minister. The last year, 49% of people waited more than 4 hours who attended the A&E department in Hillingdon. We also know that London needs 1,600 more beds as per the King's Fund report. And of course, the government has put forward £3.7 billion of funding for 48 new hospitals across the country by 2030. But this looks very insufficient. And also, do you think in the levelling up agenda of the government that London might miss out on some of that funding?
Well, we've had 12 years of austerity, so the tap's been turned off for 12 years. That's led to some of the challenges you're talking about, and that's been turned on a bit in relation to making up for the shortfall over the last 12 years. I gave some examples of the bricks and mortar challenges, with some buildings having rain coming in. There are other challenges in relation to staffing issues. One of the points made when I met the RCN earlier this week was record numbers of vacancies. Staff are stretched and aren't able to keep up with the pressure. Put aside COVID, but the non-COVID case that you know in relation to elective surgery, A&Es and so forth. There needs to be, reconsideration of some of the schemes cancelled, the bursary schemes, the grants, but also morale is rock bottom. You know this from the GP side and the medical side. It's quite clear from speaking to the RCN that morale is an all-time low amongst nursing staff as well. They were telling me stories about inabilities in keeping the staff they already had. The average length of tenure for a nurse a few years ago was 30 years, now it's 8 years, which means you've got to recruit 4 times as many, right? Challenges in the health and social care sector in relation to not just an injection of resources, but also other issues in relation to how you treat staff, how you recruit staff, and so forth. And I think it's really important that the government, gets an urgent grip with this in spring and summer, in advance of the pressures we know are coming around the corner, again, when it comes to autumn and winter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that very comprehensive answer. I mean, you're absolutely right that the morale is very low, and I think that we need to put on record that the NHS staff are working very hard, and I'm very grateful for you reminding the government of the necessity of making investment in the London hospitals. Otherwise, we will be getting... I'll be glad, for example, that I was able to say 4 departments in West London, which brought into the London Assembly, and the thing could have been much worse if that hadn't happened. But thank you very much for the hard work you do. Thank you.
And now I'll hand the chair back.
Thank you. I know that this is something which Assemblymember Boff started, which I'm happy to continue. It's called a comfort break. And therefore, I would like to propose the Assembly now adjourn for 5 minutes. I'm in the hands of the Assembly, but 5 minutes, what
Agreed.
Okay. 10 minutes? 10 minutes be so.
11:40, Chair?
11:40. We'll be back 11:40.
Cool, you give them a little bit and they want the lot.
Thank you very much.
Great.
It's just the signal to bow tie to turn off the webcast. They paused the webcast.
Well, I did.
I think it's you. All right, okay.
I did raise carbon emissions?
Thank you, Chair. The scientists are right. We must act now. The scale of the challenge ahead requires us all to act together. There is no silver bullet, and there is no single tier of government or organisation that can solve this problem alone. That's why the London Recovery Board's Green New Deal mission brings together London's boroughs and other key stakeholders to work together to reduce emissions. Our net zero pathway shows where the rapid, deep emission reductions must come from. Our buildings must be more energy efficient using fully renewable electricity and clean heat technologies like heat pumps. Public transport and active travel need to be even more accessible, and we must transition rapidly to zero-emission vehicles. I'll do everything in my power to accelerate all these changes. I'm ensuring my functional bodies lead by example, implementing bold, zero-carbon building policies in my London plan and expanding the ultra-low emission zone. We must transform our existing buildings. We have an energy and cost of living crisis, and yet the government is unwilling to accelerate action on energy efficiency that would help tackle rising fuel poverty, reduce exposure to volatile fossil fuel prices, and deliver emissions reductions. I continue to call on the government to devolve powers and funding for energy efficiency to me and other metro mayors, and to introduce a windfall tax on profiteering energy companies to fund support for people struggling through this crisis. Since 2020, my retrofit programmes have helped secure more than £221 million from the government. My public sector retrofit programme has improved over 500 buildings since 2016, saving 20,000 tonnes of carbon. My innovation partnership is connecting social landlords and UK building firms to develop social housing retrofit solutions at scale, driving up skills and driving down costs. And last November, I announced £30 million to support my Mayor's Energy Efficiency Fund. And in February, I announced £90 million for the development and delivery of a net zero project pipeline. This will initially be financed through the issue of a £500 million green bond, which will form the first phase of my financing facility for London. I'll continue to do everything in my power and encourage everyone to do the same.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I want to begin by applauding your statement that we've got to listen to the scientists, so the scientists are right. I wish more senior politicians in the public eye would start from that premise. Now, the science suggests we've got three important dates. We've got 2030, which is the date that you've set to get to net zero by. There's the date 2025 that the IPCC have set, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that says it's now or never. We've got to get to the peak of emissions, and that's the turning point. And then there's a third date, which is a political date, 2024. That's the end of your current term. And the math suggests that if we're going to get to net zero by 2030, by the end of 2024, you've got to pretty much be halfway there. Now, I met campaigners this morning outside City Hall who are campaigning on insulation. Now, they've written an open letter to you with several organisations. Now, I agree with something you'll inevitably say, that the government need to do more on this, and we're total agreement with that. My question to you is, what will you take responsibility for, and what will you do in the next year?
So thank you for your question, and thank you for your support on this area. I think the constant chivying in a constructive way of the Green Group has really helped, and the Lib Dem Group as well, actually, in this area. So we're doing a number of things, and I mentioned the Green New Deal mission, because that's a tangible example of now in relation to what we can do. And just to give you an idea of what we are doing, I mentioned briefly in my answer some of the leveraging money we're doing in relation to the government, who are helping us in relation to this part of the work we're doing. But what we're doing with the Green New Deal mission is, for example, working with local councils about can we leverage in money to support them in relation to retrofitting some of their homes that will reduce the bills of their tenants, but also reduce carbon emissions as well. That target, for obvious reasons, because the 4-year cycle is 2025, but we'd hope to make significant progress by the deadline you've given, which is 2024. But the good news is, if we get the foundations right now, there's an exponential growth once we get these policies in place. So although we may not get the progress in terms of on a pro rata basis over the next 8 years, halfway point by 2024, once you start these things moving, it's like a hockey stick curve. It really does go up swiftly, and so that's why it's really important to get the foundations right, and that's why the London Recovery Board, having one of its 9 missions, the Green New Deal, does give us a source of hope and optimism.
Yes, and something the campaigners have been arguing for is people to be skilled to do these things. Now, in 2021, I think there was 14,000 was the estimate, and you're wanting to get to 54,000 by 2025, I think it is. 2024 to 57,000. That's 4 times current employment. What are your plans to train more people pretty quickly?
Well, I'm grateful you give me a chance to mention once again what I announced at the top of the item, which is the Skills Boot Camp. So the Skills Boot Camp is one example, which I announced today, the £80 million, where we will be skilling up Londoners in future-proof jobs. which is really important. The other big announcement we made is in relation to the Mayor's Academies programme. One of the things I welcome is the government devolving to us the adult education budget, which means we can focus the further education sector on the sectors where we know there's a skills shortage, but also where there are future-proof jobs. And as you've alluded to, the green economy is one of those areas. Retrofitting, electric vehicle charging points, solar, wind installation, but also in relation to some of that needs to be done in relation to retrofitting as well. And we've got to make these jobs enticing. And so we're working with people who work in the sector to go into schools and do assemblies. And we're also focusing on primary schools as well. One of the lessons I learned when I went to Gaul recently was they're working in primary schools to make sure people at a young age can see these jobs and can aspire towards them as well.
Thank you. Moving on to flights now. We've had two reports in the last couple of weeks, one from the charity Possible and one from the Aviation Environment Federation. And they've both said that the government is essentially failing to meet its climate reduction targets on aviation or flying. Now, that's where the airline industry are out of control because they're not meeting their own targets and they're marking their own homework. Now, would you agree with me that to get to net zero by 2050, which is the UK's environmental target, that is completely incompatible with any aviation expansion?
I mean, to be fair, I've not read, but I was interested by the headlines that the Secretary of State in the last few days has done some work with, I think, Pete Buttigieg in America in relation to this area. I don't want to mislead the Assembly, so I think there is some work the government's doing in relation to aviation. So to give credit to the government, which is unlike me, so I've not read that full report yet, but I think we are, as a country, looking at what we can do in relation to carbon emissions from aviation, subject to what the government has said there. Of course, we need to make more progress in relation to reducing carbon emissions from aviation and all sectors.
You did say earlier this year, I fail to see how any airport expansion could be justified, being incompatible with achieving the UK's net zero target. Do you still stand by that?
Yeah, I think there's two separate discussions. One is expansion, and I'm against expansion. You know my views in relation to Runway 3. There's a separate discussion about how we can reduce carbon emissions from what we have, and that's the work that the government's doing. And my understanding is, and again, I've not read the full report, that our Secretary of State went to America and has signed an agreement with the US Secretary of State in relation to what we can do, working together in relation to incentivising the reduction of carbon emissions. But again, I've not read the full report, but I think that does bode well in relation to not simply focusing on reducing expansion, but making progress in relation to those aviation we do have, how they can be encouraged, enticed, incentivised to reduce the emissions that they already have.
Brilliant. Well, we have some ideas there. I note that you thank us for chivvying you along on various things. I've noticed your drug policy is now being inspired by green policy and also on road user charging. Would you now take up our policy of a frequent flyer levy?
I'm not sure what that policy is, but I'm more than happy for you to speak to me in relation to what that is.
Well, essentially, it's looking at 15% of people take 70% of the flights. And it's saying essentially the polluter pays. So this isn't going after people's family holidays or someone going on one business trip. This is about the small amount of people who frequently fly and making sure that we're not subsidising aviation, but actually we're subsidising trains. Presumably that would be something you'd be very interested in.
Sure, I'm more than happy to speak with the member offline to discuss these things. And just to reassure Londoners, we actually often do get on these sorts of stuff and do have conversations. Sometimes they're animated, sometimes they're less so, but I think it's a good example of looking for the best ideas. And you know, we want to be an administration that just because the colour of the party you belong to means we don't talk to you, we actually do and we listen as well. So can I take that away and ask colleagues in my team to speak to the member to see any ideas he's got in this area?
I really appreciate your collegiateness on this. No further questions.
Well, that's very timely because you're out of time there anyway. Okay. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Bukhari. It's 1380 and it's titled Action on Building Safety Crisis.
Thank you for your question. The building safety crisis has been caused by systemic failings across the board, and nearly 5 years after the Grenfell Tower fire, there are still thousands of Londoners who don't feel safe in their own homes. The Grenfell Tower inquiry has been forensic in putting a spotlight on the practices of the whole construction industry, developers, yes, but also product manufacturers, testers, certifiers, and of course the government. We've heard evidence suggesting the deregulatory agenda and deprioritisation of building safety led to the government presiding over an unclear and unenforced building safety regime. Following my calls for a levy on developers back in December 2020, I welcome the government's progress in ensuring the big developers pay their fair share. But developers are not the only ones to blame. Culpability lies along the entire chain. Systemic failures led to this national crisis, and it requires a long-term national government-led solution. We need long-lasting government reform that will deliver a stronger regulatory framework, improve competency and skills of those within the industry, and a culture change that puts fire safety first. I'll continue to put pressure on ministers to ensure these reforms happen. Where I have powers, I've taken action to help drive the change needed. My groundbreaking London plan now ensures that fire safety is considered at the early stages of planning for a building. New homes and GLA land commissioned via my development panel and new homes funded by the Affordable Homes Programme 2021-2026 are required to meet higher standards than the government's building regulations. I've taken steps to help shared owners in buildings with building safety defects move on with their lives by changing the GLA's policy on subletting. And I recently published best practice guidance, which has been adopted by all members of the G15 group of housing associations to improve how leaseholders navigate the EWS1 process. It's nearly 5 years since Grenfell and the tragic loss of 72 Londoners. I remain deeply disappointed that we haven't seen the wholesale systemic and cultural change that I and those affected expected. I'll continue to put pressure on the government and the industry, and I stand ready to work with them to ensure we end this crisis so Londoners can be safe in their homes.
Safety Act does enshrine some protections for leaseholders, but it's not enough. The government is calling on developers to sign up to the Building Safety Repairs Pledge. Mr Mayor, will you ensure developers in London sign up to the government's pledge?
I will do whatever we can to encourage that to happen. And it gives me a chance to give credit to Michael Gove, who's moved a long way in relation to this area since taking over this brief. And I think this wouldn't have happened had he not been the Secretary of State in this department compared to his predecessor. And I commend the work he's done here, including challenging them to sign up to the levy, and I'll do whatever I can to encourage more developers to sign up, and any help you can give would be much appreciated as well.
Thank you. Now, the GLA has significant relationships with developers. Mr Mayor, you have the ability to impact developers' profits, which they seem to care more about. Will you stop working with developers who refuse to sign up to the Building Safety Repairs Pledge?
We've got to abide by the law, as enticing as it may be. To break the law, which leads to us being liable for damages. I can't do that as the Mayor. These are taxpayers' money that I'd have to pay in damages to a private firm that sued us because we, Ultravirus, took them off a list because of reasons that we didn't have the power to do. So, subject to the legal advice we have, we'll do whatever we can to put pressure on developers. And that's why we're working closely with the government, who, Michael Gove got them in, has got 45 of them signed up of the 53. We're encouraging the others to sign up as well, and we'll do whatever we can with the powers we have to apply additional pressure as well.
Shockingly, though, 83% of leaseholders in London will not be protected from all costs related to the fire safety defects. Now, Londoners in buildings lower than 11 metres will have no financial support. Now, this is outrageous, and the Lib Dems are fighting against this. Mr Mayor, will you go further, stand up for the Londoners and refuse to work with developers who do not take responsibility for buildings that they constructed, regardless of height?
Well, we'll always act within the law, but the 3 areas where we've lobbied the government to go further is on expansion of the scope to cover supported accommodation of any height, the protection of leaseholders, to protect leaseholders from the costs for historic building safety defects they played no part in causing. That's the retrospective protection for those who've already been forced to pay out. And the building control choice. We want the removal of choice in building control for buildings of all heights to ensure a consistent standard across the board and to prevent any conflicts of interest and to prevent a two-tier system. So we're lobbying the government to go further in relation to both pieces of legislation. We're waiting to see the secondary legislation that they say they're going to publish, and we'll continue to apply pressure where we can to developers, to landowners and others to make sure steps are taken. And just to remind colleagues, it's not simply the developers, we've also got to make sure that the managers and others make progress in this area as well.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a shame that we can't go a little bit further by not working with developers, but I appreciate your answers.
Thank you for that, Senator Bukhari. Senator Duval, yes.
Whilst I understand the previous member's desire not to working with developers, but I think the clue was in your answer to the question. This isn't just a few rogue people. This is an entire sector that actually has failed, and actually successive governments have failed to keep pace with what's going on. I do agree with some of her sentiments towards, in terms of pushing the government further to include others. We know that. But do you not think, in terms of, this simple chant of we must stop working with developers is just not going to get us to where we were? I know there were recent conversations at the Fire and Safety Committee talking about that. Andy Rowe, I think, was quite eloquent in defending that. Where do you stand on those issues around this? Is it you said those words, but can you paint some pictures of what the consequences of that statement, if enacted by you and others, where would it get us in terms of some of the developments that we face?
I mean, look, the government has a lot more resources behind it than we do, and the government's gone as far as they believe they can. I mean, Michael Gove is no pushover, and he's persuaded 45 of the 53 developers to sign up to the pledge, and he will try, I have no doubt, to get even more signed up. Just think about the consequences if we were to go even further than the government in relation to not just the issues around ultravirus, but us being open to potential compensation because of the decision we'd made in relation to these companies. That's aside from the issue. We're not going to get the housing starts we require, the homes built we require, if we aren't working with developers to build these homes. So the new developments, I've already said, our standards are far higher than national building regulations, so Londoners can be reassured with that. The issue is whether we can, in a punitive way, punish these developers in relation to future contracts because of past conduct. And the law is quite clear in that area. We'll carry on working with the government in this area to push further. I think we can, be embarrassing some developers by naming them, and Tom Coppy's done a really good job with Michael Gove's department in relation to that. But within the bounds of what's lawful, we're more than willing, Member Deval, to do what we can to push developers to go even further. But as I said in my original answer, this isn't just about developers. As you said in your question, this is systemic failure across the piece in relation to what's gone on over a number of successive governments. I don't just put the responsibility at the foot of this government, successive governments, and we're going to make sure we make progress sooner rather than later.
But it was also talk about, when people talk about getting rid of regulations, getting rid of bonfire of whatever. It was a coalition government. I think, that started some of that conversation. Has this crisis that we face really forced us to think through that actually regulations aren't all bad, right? In terms of that, is there a sea change around that? And are there other battles that we might need to have on other issues? But, in terms of this sector, which is important about safety of individuals and security of their homes, have we really got to get our act together about those regulations? I'm like you with Gove, understand that, but where do you see that conversation going?
A lot of people yesterday did smile when they heard the Home Secretary welcoming the new inspection from the fire service. Who do we think got rid of those inspection requirements of the fire service, right? Cutting the red tape, the deregulation, who do we think was responsible for that? So it's gone full circle. And that's why you can appreciate the frustration of firefighters who say, hold on a sec, the standards started going down when you deregulated a few years ago, cutting the red tape, deregulation, the inverted commas mountain of red tape and so forth. And it's gone full circle. And one of the things that the Grenfell Tower public inquiry has exposed is the consequence of this race to the bottom. Cutting standards, marking your own homework. It isn't just the stuff you use to build these developments, what goes on outside, the cladding, but also fire doors, also other inspections that don't take place, the self-interest in marking your own homework and so forth. So it has gone full circle, but it shows the consequences of cutting red tape. Some red tape may be bad. There may be a good reason to get rid of it. A lot of red tape, a lot of regulation is therefore a reason to have high standards. And I think, if nothing else, what this inquiry is doing is exposing the consequences of good red tape, good regulation being got rid of. And the consequences ultimately isn't just the 72 lives lost, a tragedy, but we're seeing families across the country, not just in London, facing the consequences of additional costs and burdens.
Thank you.
I want to, Mr. Mayor, bring in Assemblymember Hall, please.
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, the Assembly agreed that they thought it was a good idea that you brought in a London safety hub Nothing's happened with that, and that would really assist here. Can you tell us whether you are going to be doing that on our recommendation or not? And if you are, when will you do that?
Chair, with the member's permission, can I drop her a note later on today about an update in relation to the hub? I've not got it in my briefing, but it's my fault, not hers. Can I drop her a note today?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you won't like me for this, but I'm going to bring up another question, which comes in later on. It actually is on the Building Safety Act. It's in the Assembly Member Clark's name. Question number 1478. And the Assembly Member would like you to answer the question before she asks a supplementary.
So shall I answer the first question? Okay. Thank you, Chair. The Building Safety Act is part of the solution in relation to the challenges we face in this area, and I welcome several of the measures of the Act, particularly the heightened scrutiny of new high-rise developments. However, I'm very concerned about the limited scope of the Act and have advocated for its expansion at every stage of the parliamentary process. First, buildings under 18 metres housing vulnerable individuals won't receive the heightened scrutiny of the new regulatory system. Second, the Act fails to offer assurances on regulatory measures to improve safety. Third, we know there are significant pressures arising from competency and skills gaps in the construction sector. I'm worried that these will impact the swift implementation of the Fire Safety and Building Safety Acts and any recommendations from the Grenfell Tower inquiry. Also, people in buildings under 11 metres remain vulnerable to crippling remediation costs, and some leaseholders with non-cladding defects face bills of up to £15,000 regardless of building heights.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really welcome your earlier comments on this subject in regards to good regulation. I think it's plain how important it is that we build fit-for-purpose regulation around our built environment and our environment in general. I'm just wondering, how do you think the Act could have helped Londoners living in buildings under 18 metres? So,
How it at the moment it doesn't really. It does between 11 and 18. Well, I think the height requirement should go. Either you're building safe or it isn't. Why should there be this, 18 metres cut-off point? What about those who've already paid in the past over the last 3-4 years? Will they get compensated? Many have, inverted commas, begged, borrowed still to pay for the cost of remediation. I don't want to. I want to spare the Deputy Chair's blushes. I will not forget going to the fire. And he played he played a key role in bringing to my attention some of the challenges on that day, and he played a lead role in relation to getting people out of their homes. But that stays with you. That wasn't 18 metres. It was 5 stories. I don't know. It wasn't. When you could smell it. So Grenfell Tower was traumatic for many of us who went there. Put aside the distress caused to those who lost their lives. In that fire, people didn't lose their lives, but for the grace of God. Daytime, so forth. The one in Worcester Park was also 5 stories, I think. And so, what's the difference? The speed of the fire, and the Deputy Chair was explaining the speed of the fire, and literally people banging on doors to get people out. Mm-hmm. What if it had been at night time? What if there hadn't been good citizens going door to door banging on doors? And so, I think this 18 metre stuff is arbitrary, and I think the government should look again in relation to why 18 metres.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I can think of one example of a development in my constituency where there's some buildings that are over 18 metres and some are under, and the situation of the various leaseholders, all of the buildings have the same fire safety defects, but depending on which building you were lucky or unlucky enough to buy in, your fate is very different in terms of your finances, and the stress levels are very different, and it's been a long, hard battle for all concerned. Just reflecting that next month it'll be 5 years since the Grenfell tragedy. The Building Safety Bill was introduced in July last year, but it will be 12 to 18 months from now before the Act is fully implemented. Would you agree that the government is taking too long to make Londoners safe? And what should they be doing to speed up the implementation of the Act?
Well, spot on in relation to delay in this Act having any impact. Without the second legislation, which is crucial, we don't really know the impact, what it's going to be. That's why it's really important for the secondary legislation to be written agreed and put into practice as soon as possible. Every week that goes by without the secondary legislation is a week where the acts can't really have any influence. Separately, there's the consultation the Home Secretary announced yesterday of 10 weeks. We need to move as fast as we can. Of course, we need to get the legislation right, but 5 years isn't acted in haste. 5 years is a lot of time, and I know, speaking to colleagues yesterday, many families are very unhappy with the personal evacuation plan recommended by the Grenfell Tower Public Inquiry not being followed up by the government. So as it is, many recommendations need to be followed up and actioned. The Act needs to be enforced by the secondary legislation and needs to be done as soon as possible.
Many thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, then we now return back to the order paper. On question number 1516, which is the name of Assembly Member McCartney on tourism in London.
Can I just reassure you, Chair, you're not on performance-related chairmanship as far as I'm concerned. But this has been a challenging meeting so far. Thank you, Chair. Getting international tourism back to its pre-pandemic levels as soon as possible is crucial to our economic recovery. A much higher proportion of London visitor spend comes from international markets than domestic ones. Central London lost £7.4 billion in consumer spending from international tourism in 2020 compared to £3.5 billion less from domestic tourism and £1.9 billion from commuters compared to 2019. That's why I launched a £10 million international tourist campaign in New York last week following the success of last year's Let's Do London domestic tourism campaign, which cost £6 million and created £81 million in economic benefit for London. The campaign will inspire travellers to choose London for their next trip by showcasing our unparalleled range of attractions, exhibitions and events. Half of all visitors to the UK visit London, and those who combine a trip to London with another UK location spend up to 64% longer in the UK. That's worth around £641 million a year to the UK economy. So I'm doing my bit, but London's leading tourism voices and I have already repeatedly lobbied the government for extra support for the tourism sector. We've asked for an increase in the 50% rate relief scheme for the retail, leisure and hospitality sectors. We've also asked for a 12.5% rate of VAT for hospitality and leisure to be made permanent in line with other European countries to encourage people back to city centres. And we've asked the government to reverse its decision to end the tax-free shopping scheme for tourists. Britain is the only European country not to offer tax-free shopping to international visitors. Sadly, the government's yet to listen, but I'll keep banging the drum for London as the best city in the world for international tourists to visit.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think the pictures and commentary on your US trip was very welcome. Can I just ask, the Queen's Jubilee celebrations are almost upon us. Is that factored into your international tourism campaign? Because it is a real showcase to the world.
Well, firstly, Jake, can I say many of us had the privilege of spending time with Her Majesty this week. Didn't she look great, healthy and well? It was a joy to see her. Listen, I think Her Majesty is a great asset for our country, but I think Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee is a huge opportunity for our city and our country. One of the things, I can see there's a member of the press who was with us in the States in the public gallery. He'll be bored of me saying this, but I talked to our American friends about was they can come to the UK, the only place in the world for the pomp and pageantry, and celebrating Her Majesty's 70th year on the throne. And so it's a big factor this year. We've been blessed by two big things this year in relation to our recovery. One is, I think, the world's finest railway line opening up next week, named after Her Majesty. And secondly is Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee. There are also other great things happening in our city, from the Stones, Adele, Ed Sheeran, Elton John playing in London, great street parties, 50 years of Pride, the Women's Euros coming to our country, the final's going to be in London, other great sporting events, the Carnival is back and so forth. But there's no doubt about it, it's a fantastic jewel to have in our crown, if you forgive the pun, having Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee taking place this year. And a lot of those activities during those bank holiday weekends will be in London.
Thank you. Can I ask you, what are your current projections for tourism recovery in London? And I'm particularly concerned about the high level of inflation, for example, in the US, a 40-year high similar to our country. People will have less money in their pockets. Are we really making a virtue of the fact that our museums are free, for example?
Yeah, so the estimates the industry leaders have is put a park for a second our tourism campaign and our trip, but the international tourism won't return to pre-pandemic 29 levels until 2024, and the shorter haul markets until 2023. And if you bear in mind, in answer to a previous question, I said about £10 million we've lost a year. We could be losing £30 to £40 billion if it's the case that international tourism doesn't return until 2024. That's why this campaign is so important, to get international tourists back to the UK. Inflation is a factor across the globe, but across the globe there is more assistance being given from their national governments, and also, frankly speaking, the exchange rate benefits the return of American tourists to London. And so that's an advantage in relation to bringing American tourists back to London, as well as the offer. And also, you know, in America, many of the people I spoke to, particularly in New York, have benefited from working from home in relation to money they've saved. Savings are big. Exchange rate is good. There's a fantastic offer in London. In fact, a holiday to London, if you're on the East Coast, can be cheaper than a holiday in other parts of America or in South America.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the next question is, as per order paper, is 1573, in the name of Assembly Member Sheikh, on Central Activity Zone, Article 4 direction.
Thank you, Chair. London's Central Activity Zone is the vibrant heart and one of the world's most attractive business locations and an important destination for tourism, shopping, nightlife and culture. Central London accommodates 1/3 of London's jobs and makes a unique contribution to the nation's prosperity, accounting for around 11% of UK economic output pre-pandemic. The government's permitted development rights could have a devastating impact on the CAZ if boroughs are not allowed to bring in Article 4 directions. Up to 1,500 square metres of floor space of any commercial building could be converted to residential use with minimal checks and balances. London could see a substantial loss of office space, leading to higher rents for businesses, undermining the benefits of the CAZ and likely resulting in smaller businesses being squeezed out and jobs relocated or lost entirely. Unconstrained permitted development rights would also significantly harm the West End and other shopping, leisure and tourism destinations across the ZAZ, with the loss of the independent and international offer that gives Central London its appeal. Uncontrolled conversion of premises to residential would have an impact on the whole range of sectors. Some 26,000 people in the arts and culture industry work in the CAZ. It is home to fast-growing sectors such as creative, tech and knowledge industries. Whilst we all want to see new homes in the CAZ, these need to continue to come through planning permissions with important requirements around affordable housing and quality. Housing delivered through permitted development does not provide affordable, accessible or sustainable housing, bypassing the standards set out in my London plan. Instead of this race to the bottom with piecemeal and unplanned development, the government should let boroughs and the GLA continue to deliver homes in central London in a properly planned way, coordinating delivery of homes, jobs and infrastructure to support London's recovery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I'd go even further than you. I don't think it could have a devastating impact on the CAZ. I think it will absolutely have a devastating impact on the CAZ. It was really disappointing to see the government refuse the Article 4 directions for 7 boroughs that fall within the CAZ, all these acronyms, It sort of, like you sort of said, it sort of seemed to be encouraging a race to the bottom. It seemed to be disjointed governance. Surely the government of London, surely the people who sit in City Hall and people in the councils who know their areas are best placed to understand where housing is best suited in their areas. And you know, the PDRs that this government seems to be a little bit obsessed with and the rejection of these Article 4s for these councils, you know, absolutely will compromise small businesses and undermine the benefits of the CAZ, which, as you sort of said, you know, even if you look in 2019, was contributed £214 billion to the UK economy. I mean, why is the government wanting to hold that back? So my question to you is, how can City Hall support these inner London boroughs to protect their high streets and local areas, seeing as the government has now rejected their Article 4 directions?
It's a big concern. And councils, as you've suggested in your question, just feel, and that this must be right, know their communities better than civil servants in Whitehall love them as we do. And there is a concern that civil servants think the reason for a lack of development is because of the planning rules. I've seen developments where there's been conversions, office to residential, which are awful because of a lack of councillors and officers from the authority being involved in planning permission, and instead developers using the PD route as well. And once it's lost, it's lost. And so we're working with councils and we're working with the Department for Levelling Up and Homes and Communities officials to understand what the issue is, so they can try and make them understand the concerns that councils have. And this is a cross-party issue, by the way. Political parties that run councils of all colours in relation to what we can do to protect areas and to make sure that civil servants understand that the benefit of the Article 4 direction is it understands the rich mosaic of buildings and the agglomeration benefits of this to a community. So we're carrying on working with the councils to support them in relation to discussions with officials, hoping it's just a misunderstanding rather than anything more serious and sinister.
Well, I need to develop your optimism, I think. Now, we've also sort of, following on from this, seen the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill published recently, and I think it gives us an insight into the government's wider agenda on the future of planning. And now, although we've sort of seen some improvements from their initial proposals in the white paper a couple of years ago, there are some clear and serious red flags. And as chair of the Planning Regeneration Committee this year, building on Nicky Gavron's work and our previous chair, Assemblymember Boff, I look forward to working with you to discuss what we can do from City Hall to ensure these incoming reforms in the bill make sure that the planning system works for Londoners. And I just wanted to, although I'm running out of time, briefly ask you how you hope to ensure that.
Well, it's really important to work with the councils across London to see what we can do in relation to making sure that the new infrastructure levy is used to benefit local communities in relation to benefits. You remember the benefits of Section 106, not perfect, but it meant you could, for example, persuade a developer to have more genuinely affordable homes. You could persuade a developer to do more to help the particular needs of a community. And so we need to understand more the details of what the infrastructure levy entails in the new bill the government has, and work with not just London councils and the LGA, but also those pragmatic, responsible developers, so we make sure, working together, we can ensure that a new levy benefits the communities that the government actually says it wants to benefit, but inadvertently may miss out on the fruits of any levy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with provision of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business of the agenda to be completed? Agreed. Thank you for your answers. The next question is the question number 1548 in the name of Assembly Member Moema, and is called. It's titled Kerslake Review.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. I'm proud that we've delivered almost 13,000 new City Hall funded council homes that have been started since 2018 as part of the biggest council house building programme in our capital in a generation, and another record year of affordable home starts. But I know we must do even more. The Kerslake Review provides a framework for taking a significant step forward in maximising the delivery of new, genuinely affordable homes on GLA Group land. In my formal response, I've set out exactly how I intend to take each of the recommendations forward. My team are working at pace to set up the structures and staffing necessary to implement the recommendations effectively. I've published a statement of shared policy that has been endorsed by senior leaders across the organisation and reaffirms the GLA's group's priorities for housing delivery on GLA Group land. I've appointed Lynn Garner as a new senior professional lead for GLA Group housing delivery. My Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development, Tom Copley, will establish a new Homes for Londoners Board subcommittee to oversee the GLA Group housing programme and scrutinise performance. I will look to establish a City Hall developer over two stages. First, by expanding the GLA's existing housing development activities, and second, by piloting the direct delivery of housing. This work is already underway and is supported by extra resource set out in my recent budget.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. And it was really great yesterday to hear at the first session of this year's Housing Committee an in-depth conversation about the Kerslake Review. So a lot of those recommendations are really welcome, and I'm sure many people around here, but especially on this side, have particularly welcomed the 50% commitment to genuinely affordable on GLA land and bringing those disciplines together across the GLA family. So I just wanted to ask you, what's your view on the assessment that the GLA should not take on the landlord function of those homes that are built and instead transfer that over to either councils or registered providers, just given that the the GLA doesn't have that competence at the moment. It's not really something that they do.
Well, there's always a temptation for one to extend one's powers and to increase the remit and so forth. I think you've got to respect the powers councils have in relation to this area. Most of them take this, remit and function very seriously, as indeed do housing associations. So I think we should try and maximise what we are allowed to do by legislation, what we can do, and help councils and housing associations, do that really important function of being a landlord. Anybody who's spoken to a council, and I know many of you have, or a housing association about that realises it's labour intensive. It requires a huge amount of expertise. We've not got the resources, the budget, the staff to do that, and so I'm very happy to allow councils and housing associations to do that, and for us to maximise our strategic function, whether it's land assembly, whether it's helping with permissions, whether it's helping with speeding up any of that sort of stuff, to help councils do that job properly. And that also means, by the way, challenging them where we need to do so, but also working closely with them in joint ventures as well, where we need to do so as well.
Thank you. And one of the other things that we heard yesterday was about the different ways in which the functional bodies of the GLA, for example, the police and fire service, fire LFC, dispose in slightly different ways to, for example, the City Hall itself. And really welcome the idea that, to preempt, I think, Assembly Member Hall's possible question about the strategy from MOPAC around its disposals, how you're going to bring all of that together so we can have, like you say, a more strategic approach to improving the pace and the volume of homes that are built, and have a shared understanding of what the priorities are, whether it's around best value or increasing new homes across the portfolio.
And this is one of the small T tensions that have got to be overcome, because the legislation that covers surplus land in TfL, in MOPAC, MPS, in the LFC, is different. We're going to make sure everyone's on the same page in relation to what the needs of our city are. And that's one of the jobs that Lynn Garner will have in relation to the joint Londoners. Everyone, I think, agrees. You speak to those in the Met Police Service, too many of their staff don't live in London because they can't afford to live in London. They would love for their staff to live in London. Same goes for the fire service and others. So everyone agrees that the need for genuine affordable homes in our city. This issue of best value is one that we need to make sure that nobody's inadvertently not providing best value. And so one of the jobs that Lynn Garner will have, working with colleagues in City Hall, Tom Copley, the Chief Investment Officer, and others, is to make sure everyone's on the same page in this area. I think everyone's signed up to the objective, and I think the COSDAC review was really useful in reminding us that actually everyone should be focused on that. And let's be frank, the expertise of MOPAC, MPS, LFC, TfL isn't in housing delivery, right? And so we should let them do the bread and butter stuff they're good at doing, and let somebody else be in charge of this area. And that's one of the things we hope Lynn Garner will bring to the table.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Best. It's number 1599. It's on assessing mayoral policies.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. I'm proud to have introduced policies that have directly improved Londoners' lives since I first became Mayor in 2016. Through a record £1 billion investment to plug the gap left by government austerity, we've put 1,300 additional police officers on London streets. Gun crime, knife crime and burglary are all coming down in London, even as they continue to rise across the rest of the country. We've set up England's first violence reduction unit, which has already benefited over 80,000 Londoners. We've already halved the level of toxic air in central London through the ULEZ and other measures, and we're looking to go further to protect the health of even more Londoners, particularly in outer London. We've overseen the highest number of council house starts in a generation, and we again exceeded our affordable homes target last year. We've helped over 110,000 young people with the £70 million Young Londoners Fund, and we aim to reach 100,000 more in this mayoral term. These are cold, hard facts, clear evidence that our policies are the right ones and that they are effective. We also have detailed reporting mechanisms, and we've done a lot of work, including working with Assembly members to improve the quarterly reporting to the Assembly and Londoners that we inherited when I took office. These reports are now more timely, better presented and easier to follow, and since last year have been structured around our recovery missions, telling a clear story of how we're performing. They're published on the GLA website to ensure They can be accessed by every Londoner who wants to track our progress. We continuously evolve these reports with new metrics and measures, and we will now be exploring how we can bring together reporting across the GLA group to measure impact and making use of new digital interfaces. My office has commissioned evaluations of projects and programmes to understand their effectiveness when it's appropriate to do so. We're doing this now with two of our larger investment programmes, the Adult Education Budget and the Good Growth Fund, using independent evaluators to ensure the programmes are effective. All this provides a lot of information on which to assess my performance as Mayor, and ultimately the effectiveness of my policies will be judged by Londoners themselves. I was proud to receive another vote of confidence when I was re-elected last year, and I continue to focus on delivering for the city I love.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. A vital part of assessing the effectiveness of policy is assessing its success against the original aims. So if we take the TfL junk food ban, for example, this policy, when released, stated that products that would not be permitted within the network would be chocolate and cheeseburgers, amongst other items. And much like the fast food wrappers that still litter the underground, you can still see these adverts across the network. So how can you consider this policy effective when it hasn't done what it set out to do, which is remove these adverts from our network?
The ban on advertising foods high in food, sugar and salt has been an unparalleled success. I'll make sure my office sends to the member later on today the independent evidence which confirms what a success it's been. We couldn't talk about this much during the pre-election period, but I'll make sure that members of the Assembly know what an unparalleled success it was. The ban wasn't of particular products. It was products that were high in fats, sugar and salts. And the good news is we've made progress in relation to the children, fewer of whom are eating foods high in fats, sugar and salts. And it's another example of the effectiveness of that policy. And by the way, the pre-pandemic, the revenues also didn't fall as some predicted they would do so.
Let me be clear again, Mr. Mayor. I think that I've read and understand the ban very clearly, and I don't think I can share this with you, but a Grand Big Mac bacon, which I'm going to show to Assembly Member Bailey here, on one side of a bus stop in April 2022 in Hillingdon, and another set of 5 bars of large chocolate on the other side of that bus. They all come under the what is not permitted under the ban, and yet they are just one of a multiple of examples across the network which are still there. So I ask again, if these adverts were supposed to be banned, yet they are still there, how is that effective? The bans were supposed to be gone, the ads were supposed to be gone, and they are still there.
That's a different question. The question is the effectiveness of the ban. The ban's been effective. The issue is, are there adverts up there that shouldn't be up there? That's a different point. I'm more than happy to look at adverts that shouldn't be on the TfL estate that are on their TfL estate. So if, for example, without naming the product, those two particular products are high in fats, sugar and salts, they shouldn't be up there. I'll make sure, Chair, that TfL are made aware of those two adverts. And if there are any other adverts you're aware of,
Hundreds.
Oh, well, let us know what they are. I'll pass them on to the team at TfL to see whether they should be up there. And if they shouldn't be, they should be taken down.
Okay, so again, I'll let you know, because obviously I would have thought that would be something you would consider a success of the food ban, ad ban, if they weren't there, but they are. Let's move on to the other point. This was set up specifically to tackle childhood obesity. Childhood obesity has gone up in London more than anywhere in the country. So the trend across England, obesity has risen. In London, it has risen more. So how is that effective when this policy was set up to tackle childhood obesity?
So there's been independent analysis of the impact of the ban on foods that are high in fats, sugar and salt. And that independent analysis confirms what a success has been. I'm more than happy, as I've said in answer to the previous question, to share that with the member who may have missed it during the pre-election period for good reasons. And we'll make sure we publicise that more today in light of the fact that members of the Assembly aren't aware of the success of the ban. In fact, it's been emulated by cities across the globe because of the success we've had.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Childhood obesity up, the ad's still on the network, the ban without any reasonable sound evidence to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. Thank you, Assembly Member Best. I want to bring in Assembly Member Hirani, please.
Thank you, Chair. And we are in the midst of an obesity crisis, and I'm glad at least it's recognised by the Assembly member there. But also on the obesity crisis, looking at the government's plan on addressing it, they have introduced delays into the junk food ban on television and also on buy one, get one free deals in supermarkets. So what are your views on the government's delay and what impact will it have on childhood obesity in London and across the country?
One of the problems, I think, and it's illustrated not just by the two examples that the member gave of the U-turns. One of the problems we have is a Prime Minister who's weak and effectual, and he's just throwing red meat, forgive the pun, to his backbenchers, the right-wing ones, to keep him in his job. And so you're going to see, my prediction is, more and more, when the going gets tough, the government doing a U-turn. And these are just two examples of U-turns done by the government. You saw Jamie Oliver yesterday expressing his concern about these U-turns from government. In fact, our ban on foods high in fat, sugar and salt was even more successful than the sugar tax the government introduced, which they lauded. And I think what I say to the Prime Minister is, you know, when he almost lost his life, he talks about the impact of being overweight on his life chances. And he said he was on a personal mission to lose weight and to fight obesity because he could see the link between being overweight and the consequences of COVID. That personal mission he talked about seems to have been forgotten about when the going gets tough. And I'd remind him that there are many 11-year-olds across the country who are overweight and obese and who could do with some assistance, whether it's the watershed ban, whether it's their families, because of the cost of living crisis, you know, taking advantage of the buy one, get one free, and then many of those things they buy being processed or high in fat, sugar and salt, leading to a ticking time bomb when it comes to the consequences on them individually, their families, the NHS and productivity. And, you know, good leaders weather the storm. Evidence this guy's not a good leader.
Mr. Mayor, I want to bring back Assembly Member Best again.
Sure.
Thank you. The junk food ban was always
sorry, our time is still ticking. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
The junk food ad ban was always set up because to stop children being enticed by the adverts they saw on the network, yet the study, which you've referred to several times, only monitored food that came through the house of families on a weekly shop. Now, I don't know many children that are responsible for their weekly shop. It's more that on-the-go food or after school that we were trying to tackle. So in effect, looking at the effectiveness of this policy, will you look into that on-the-go junk food that is brought out the house and the trends there? Because that's what the junk food ad was supposed to stop.
So the member's experience of going for a weekly shop with her children is very different to mine and other Londoners. You speak to most mums and dads and families, they often go on a weekly shop with their children. And their children, having seen the adverts, often point at stuff they would like to buy. And not unreasonably, mum, dad, Kira tries to accede to the requests of their children who are bombarded with these adverts on the way to and from schools. So it appears now the policy of the Conservative Party isn't opposing the ban as they did a few years ago when I introduced it, but it's now saying we should go wider at a time when their government is going narrower. I'm more than happy to take representations from the Conservatives on this issue, and I'll ask my staff to look at those recommendations and even suggest that we send them to the Prime Minister, who could do with listening to Conservative members in the Assembly.
Sitting here, listening to this topic reminds me of the shackles of neutrality, which the Chair had to have, General Boff reminded us. Reminded us at the AGM. Okay, the next question is in the name of Assembly Member Devenish. It's in number 1691 and is titled Progress Towards Driverless Trains.
Thank you, Chair. As set out in the most recent funding agreement with the government, the Department for Transport is leading a joint programme with TfL to look at the possible implementation of driverless trains on the London Underground network. This work is evidence-based and TfL is cooperating with the government as it is required to do. This is a technically complex area and will take significant investment and a long time to implement. TfL will never compromise on safety. I'm advised that the introduction of driverless trains would require new rolling stock, new signalling and other infrastructure such as platform edge doors to meet safety requirements. What this means in practice is that there is absolutely no scope for short-term operational cost savings through this means, and that the upfront costs would have to be covered by a further capital commitment from the government. Driverless trains would require billions of pounds of upfront investment and are not a priority for TfL. The focus should instead be on investment in renewing and enhancing existing trains, such as on the Bakerloo line, where trains serving the members' constituency turned 50 this year, the oldest rolling stock in the UK. Our priority should be invested in the safety and reliability of the current network and improving and decarbonising existing infrastructure and services. TfL contracts contribute around £7 million to the UK economy and support tens of thousands of jobs around the country. The UK's recovery from the pandemic requires London to recover strongly, and without a properly funded transport network in the capital, that recovery is at risk. Despite the extreme financial challenges caused by the pandemic, I've already set out a range of proposals that will help support TfL's financial sustainability in the near future. But it's essential that an agreement is reached with the government on longer-term capital funding so we can keep our city moving and avoid a managed decline scenario.
Good morning, or rather good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Do you recognise the potential benefits, though, of driverless operation in terms of maximising the efficiency of tube services and the number of trains per hour, please?
Oh, in a theoretical sense, of course. But just at the same time, you'd accept, in a theoretical sense, the downsides as well.
Why is it I'm not convinced that you're really in favour of this? And perhaps we could turn to perhaps the reason. Do you think that you're effectively agreeing with the RMT on this rather than looking at the evidence that hopefully is forthcoming?
So, Chair, I'm being asked to mind read why the member thinks I appear not to be in favour of something which is beyond even my abilities. And secondly, asked me for my views on the RMT, which again are outside my remit. I'm quite clear in relation to the evidence I've been given about the upfront costs of this. The DFT are leading on this piece of work, and TfL are fully corroborating. Why don't we wait and see what the DFT come up with in relation to this joint programme of work that is evidence-based that they're doing?
Well, I think possibly you may be looking to appease the RMT, but, you know, can I just raise one slightly tangential point, Mr. Mayor? Next week you talked earlier quite rightly about Her Majesty and how on Tuesday we both enjoyed the visit. Well, it's obviously there's the Queen's Jubilee next week, and of course you have seen in the papers that the RMT are looking to shut both Euston and Green Park tube station next week. Now, your record on strikes isn't great. Are you going to be able to stop them closing those two stations and disrespecting Her Majesty?
Well, the good news is my record on industrial action is far superior than the previous guy. But I think the trade union should get back around the table. I'm against this strike. I think it sends all the wrong messages. I think at a time we're encouraging commuters back to central London, at a time we're encouraging people across the globe to celebrate Her Majesty's Platinum Jubilee, these two stations potentially, I say potentially being closed because of industrial action is good for nobody. And I'd encourage the RMT to call off this industrial action.
Well, we can agree for once, Mr. Mayor, but you are chairman of TfL, so will you be spending any of your time in the next few days making sure that happens, please?
Well, I think it's really important for the TfL negotiators to do their job, and I'd encourage the RMT to get back around the table. I couldn't have been clearer in answer to you in a public fora in relation to my views of the RMT industrial action planned for Her Majesty's celebrations. It's really important the RMT understand the consequences of their actions in relation to people potentially being put off coming to celebrate, which would be heartbreaking for them. Many have been looking forward to this celebration for a while. You and I both enjoyed seeing Her Majesty in person. I don't want people not to come for fear of industrial action and not see her in person as well.
Well, I hope you will actually get involved, Mr. Mayor, because you are the Mayor of London. It's absolutely important that this industrial action doesn't take place, and we all enjoy the Queen's Jubilee. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next question is number 1665, because we've already dealt with the one on the Building Safety Act. It's the name of Assembly Member Hall, and it's titled Living in London.
Thank you, Chair. London is the greatest city in the world. I've lived in London my whole life, and as much as it's a great city to visit, I know it's an even better city to live in. Like any major city, we have our challenges, and my mission as mayor has been to improve London for everyone who calls our city home, and we've achieved a lot in the past 6 years. Londoners need decent homes they can afford, and after decades of under-delivery before I became mayor, we're turning a corner in London. Almost 13,000 new City Hall-funded council homes have been started since 2018, and we exceeded our affordable homes target yet again last year. Londoners need clean air, and thanks to bold policies, we've halved toxic air in central London, and we're going further to replicate this across more of our city. We've planted over 420,000 trees since I was first elected, creating new green lungs that not only clean our air, but make London a better place to live. Londoners need the skills to access good, well-paid work, and we helped 200,000 people access free skills training last year alone, and have put £44 million into my Academies programme to help Londoners into good jobs. Londoners need to be able to get around safely and quickly. We launched the Night Tube and extended the Northern Line, and next week we're opening the amazing new Elizabeth Line, which will transform travel for millions of Londoners. Londoners need green spaces, good design and the protection of our heritage, all of which are enshrined in my London plan. And they need access to our ever-expanding cultural offer, such as at East Bank, where we're opening up museums, theatres and other cultural spaces. We've achieved a lot since I became mayor, but while I talk London up, the government not only talks us down, but by failing to provide the support we need, threatens to put all the progress we've made at risk. Just giving 3 examples, Chair. We need a long-term sustainable funding deal for TfL to prevent the transport network from going into managed decline. We need real action from government on the cost of living crisis, including devolving the power over rent control so we can freeze rent over the next 2 years. And we need proper funding for our police, addressing the £159 million funding gap the Home Office itself acknowledges London is owed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, you'll know Amir Khan, the very much loved Amir Khan, the former world champion boxer. And Amir Khan recently said that he had planned on moving to the capital with his family, but since the robbery, and you'll remember that shocking robbery where he was mugged at gunpoint, since the robbery, it's changed his mind. So what are you doing to make those considering London as their home feel safer? Because you did mention some good things that have happened. I won't deny that. But if you ask lots of people, one of their number one things is they want to feel safe. I've heard people say, I'd rather be hungry than feel unsafe. So what are you going to do to make them feel safer?
Well, firstly, anybody who's spoken to a victim of crime, particularly a robbery, knows how distressing it is. And it was incredibly distressing for Amir Khan and his wife. So I think you've got to just accept it was incredibly distressing for him. It's no consolation to him that violent crime has gone down and gun crime down by more than 30% since 2016. So according to official crime figures, violent crime is going down. But you're right that the perception isn't going down, and that's one of the reasons why trust and confidence is so important. You'll have seen the metrics which shows that Londoners' trust and confidence in the Met Police Service has been going down progressively over the last few years, which has an impact on how they feel about safety. And one of the jobs that I'll have with the new Commissioner is to address the issue of trust and confidence in policing, which has an impact on how they feel in London. It's one of the most important jobs we have is trust and confidence in the police and their ability to keep us safe.
Yes, and I know you do cherry-pick figures. Some figures go up, some figures go down, but some figures go up quite substantially. And now that the pandemic has passed, figures show that crime is going back up. In the financial year 2021 to 22, robbery is up 6.7%, theft from a person is up 89.2%, rape is up 23.85%, violence without injury is up 9.2%, violence with injury is up 15.7%. There are other figures, but I won't go into them now. Do you think that actually makes anybody feel safe?
With respect, I think the one of us in danger of cherry picking is you, because you're comparing pandemic year figures with figures now. The true comparator.
So are you, and we pointed that out, and you wouldn't accept that. But I'm telling you now what the figures are, and I'm saying if the figures are going up, if rape is up 23.85%, how on earth can people feel safe in London? And you know that they don't.
The true comparator is either 2016, the year I became mayor, or 2019, the year before the pandemic. And as I've made clear in answer to the question, according to those comparators, crime has been going down, particularly the violent crimes. I think the former chair of the Police and Crime Committee, who had to step down because of a police investigation, himself accepted earlier on during Mayor's question time that the areas of crime that Londoners care about most, according to his words, were the violent crimes, and that was a priority that Londoners had. That was a priority of the police service and myself. And in those areas, which according to the former chair of the Police and Crime Committee, Londoners cared about, knife crime with injury, knife crime with those below the age of 25, gun crime, burglary and so forth, all of those have been going down. By the way, all of those going up across the rest of the country, all of those going down in London. No complacency, and we've got to make even more progress to make sure we make more progress in those violent crimes going down.
Well, I'll just read you the comments from the wonderful world champion Amir Khan. He said, Mayor Khan needs to pull his finger out and tackle the increasing levels of gun and knife crime. He's making the city unlivable. You can't drive anywhere, and we all know that's right. Traffic is horrendous, just ask the black cabbies, and there's no quality of life. And that comes from a world champion that we all love and admire, Amir Khan. So those points are correct, aren't they? And if that's how people perceive London to be, you as the mayor need to address these issues. Thank you, Chair.
What was that a question to the mayor?
If he wants to answer what Amir Khan, our very much loved former world champion boxer, yes, he can.
Well, Chair, as I've already explained, anybody who's the victim of crime doesn't want their crime politicised in a cheap and pathetic way by members of the Assembly. What they want to do is make sure that their issues are heard. And I've heard loud and clear what Amir has said in relation to his experience of being robbed at gunpoint of his expensive watch. The police are investigating that particular crime. We've also, during the course of this morning, the focus with additional resources from City Hall, not from the government, in relation to improving sanction detection. It's no complacency to a mayor to know that violent crime is going down in London. I'm incredibly proud, by the way, of our policies to improve the quality of air in London. I know it's inconvenient to the member that she can't drive around like she used to because she's got to pay if a vehicle is polluting or if she comes into the central London area. But I don't apologise for trying to encourage more and more Londoners to walk, cycle, use public transport or use a cleaner vehicle. We've seen in central London a reduction of 50% in relation to the toxic air.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You know full well you're using our time.
4,000 premature deaths. 4,000
question been asked, and the mayor has the right to answer the question.
4,000 premature deaths. 4,000 premature deaths a year because of the poor quality air. Really important. We're going to carry on trying to make progress in those areas, and I'll do what I can, working with the police and members of the community to make progress in relation to reducing violent crime further, but also to improve the toxic air in our city as well.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You're using up our time.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. And I think I will bring Assemblymember Duval in, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very important question. I was expecting an interesting debate, and I think there is an issue about fear of crime and how that can add to public safety awarenesses. But there's also other issues that contribute to it. You mentioned air quality. You mentioned, I think we talked about shabbiness on, the issue about renewing the stock on our undergrounds and railways. I get on the DLR, I notice the chairs are threadbare now, and I know there are going to be delays. So isn't one of the issues around what we could be doing for making London an attractive place is actually making sure that the government does the deal in terms of actually picking up the pieces from the COVID-19 money, be fair to Londoners, give them back what they need, let's get some more stability into the system, and then get back into some of that issues of reinvesting back into the tube. On policing, I go back to original conversation today. It's all very well for the member to say policing and quote one victim of crime. I can quote a number of victims of crime who feel that actually they feel hard done by in terms of circumstances. We can all do that. The solution here is about resources. Isn't it about getting back some of our money that actually should be coming into policing again, that we can actually put into some of those areas that members have got concerns about, whether it's robbery, whether it's a physical presence? That's the issue. Your record on that is pretty good. You've actually worked with government in some ways of adding value to the issues. Those members over there are in denial on it. So do you not think there's a wider issue around some of these issues, and some of it does come back to money, and some of the challenges we face in terms of making London still an attractive environment to actually come and play in, to come and live in, to come and educate in, to live here and to be part of our communities, is really about what we should be looking at over the coming years. What's your thoughts on some of those challenges, and where? Is it just about money, or is there something else we can be doing?
No, let me be frank and answer your question. You raised really important points. There are some people who think the way to make our city more attractive is to spend £6 million on a mound in Marble Arch, right? I don't call Stig in the dump a way of making London attractive. And we saw what the people in Westminster thought of that as an idea of making London more attractive. There are people in parts of Wandsworth who think making London more attractive is giving permission for residential development that's bought by foreigners to invest in, rather than homes that Londoners can afford to live in. And we saw what the people of Wandsworth thought of that as a way of making London more attractive. Starving our city of thousands of police officers over the last 12 years. We've lost across the country more than 21,000 police officers. It doesn't make your country more attractive. And by the way, there are victims of crime across the country in all 43 police forces. The last time I checked, I was only the Police and Crime Commissioner of one of those 43 police forces. And you mentioned attractiveness in relation to public transport. The Bakerloo line is now 50 years old. The experience of the Bakerloo line for those who use it is not one of attractiveness. And if the government gave us the long-term capital deal we need, we could make sure our public transport was more attractive. And so there are examples we can point to. I just think it's in bad taste, pointing to the experience of a victim of a crime that Ahmed Khan was, to make a cheap point in relation to the attractiveness of our city. I think she's going to reflect on this after the meeting and wish she hadn't done it. I wish she hadn't done it as well.
Okay. Can we move on to the next question? The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Boff. It's number 1597, trans and gender diverse access to healthcare.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a passionate and vocal supporter of trans and gender diverse Londoners. I want to ensure that we do all that we can for these communities to enable them to live their lives authentically and with the respect we all deserve. Trans and gender diverse people should have full access to all the services and opportunities that other Londoners have, including general health services. I meet regularly with the NHS leadership in London, and I'll continue to champion the healthcare needs of trans and gender diverse people in these discussions. I want to thank the Health Committee for their inquiry earlier this year into access to general healthcare for the trans and gender diverse community. The report recommendations raised several important issues about NHS data collection, highlighting actions the NHS could be taken to improve awareness of the needs of this group across the whole of the NHS, including through training for GPs and other staff. Most of the recommendations contained in the report are aimed at the NHS, and I know that the Health Committee has followed these up directly. In my response to the Health Committee of the 31st of March, I agreed to write to NHS Digital regarding data collection. I've done this, and I await their reply, which I will share with the Health Committee when I receive it. My health inequality strategy contains many actions and approaches that will benefit trans and gender diverse Londoners, for example, mental health policies and programmes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Mayor, but I've got about 5 seconds left. All the recommendations that were recommended to other bodies you accepted. All the recommendations were about what you should be doing. You said you're going to wait around for somebody else to do. We want you to take the lead on this issue, not just expect other people to pick up the responsibility.
You're out of time now. But it makes you feel better, does it?
It does.
Okay. The final question for this morning session is in the name of Assembly Member Ahmed on tackling crime.
Thank you, Chair. Over a decade of austerity cuts and complacency from the government have eroded policing, justice services and victim support organisations around the country. It's hardly surprising that the public lacks faith in the government's agenda for policing and safety. My new police and crime plan outlines what I'm doing to tackle and prevent crime. I've invested a record £1 billion in the MPS, put in an extra 1,300 police officers on London streets. I provided £54 million of dedicated funding through the London Crime Prevention Fund to tackle complex problems across borough boundaries and support local communities to reduce violence and offending. The good news is the latest ONS stats show that in the year to December 2021, overall crime was stable in London, even as it increased in England and Wales. Knife crime in London fell by 7.2%, gun crime by 17%, and robbery fell by 18%. Welcome reductions outstripping national performance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Prime Minister has made a number of public interventions in recent months where he has misquoted crime statistics in an effort to make it appear that crime is falling nationwide. Crime rose by 18% in 2021, driven by a 54% increase in fraud cases. Can he really be trusted to reduce crime when he refuses to acknowledge the problem and address it head on?
No, and he's a liar as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
No more indications? Okay. Right, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your answers. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Okay. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will be at 10 o'clock on Thursday, 9th of June 2022 in the Chamber of City Hall. Noted? Thanks. And one further business under any other business is that I've agreed to accept one item for urgent business at this meeting in accordance with Section 100B. The Mayor can go. Sorry. The Mayor can go. Section B, 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended, on the ground that the matter in question will need to be determined at the earliest opportunity. The item proposes that the authority be delegated to myself, as Chair, in consultation with the group leaders, to agree the wording of a loyal address on the occasion of Her Majesty's the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, should the GLA receive an invitation to deliver such an address. Do members agree with this recommendation? Agreed. Okay. Finally, members are reminded that there's a lunchtime briefing straight after this meeting with Theo Blackwell, Chief Digital Officer for London, on the Tech Charter and connectivity. Members are welcome to attend the committee rooms 5 and 6. Thank you.